Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the second day of CCAT 2021. We are thrilled to have a really great programme of speakers drawing on a very different theme to the subjects that were covered yesterday. We are going to get started in just a second, but I just thought I'd go through some housekeeping and a bit of an overview of the day and of the CCAT project for those that weren't able to attend yesterday's session, and then we'll get on with the programme of speakers that we have planned for you. I'm Emma McKinley. I'm a research fellow at Cardiff University and part of the CCAT team. And I've been kind of tasked with getting the day started and reminding of some of the housekeeping rules. So of course, as I said yesterday, we would have loved to have been with you all in person to be running this event as a live, in real life event. Unfortunately, that's still not possible, but we've had some great audience participation over this event so far, and also last year's CCAT 2020 events. We'd really encourage you to continue that. We had some great questions from the audience yesterday, so please do put those in the Q&A box for our speakers today. If you have any tech issues, or if you have any reports or links, or as happened yesterday, if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us about the projects you're working on, please pop that in the chat box to keep those things separate. It makes it a bit easier for me to manage the Q&A and discussion panel later in the day. Again, we'd like to keep this interactive online as well, so please live tweet using CCAT 2021 and tag CCAT project, and also if any of the speakers put up that information, feel free to include them in that as well. You're all automatically muted and have your videos automatically switched off, so please don't worry about that when you're dealing with dogs coming into the room or phones ringing. We won't hear any of it. But if you do want to ask a question, as I said, it will be best for you to do that through the Q&A box rather than raising your hand. The sessions are all being recorded, so if you missed yesterday or you have to dip out for meetings or anything today, we will make those recordings available on the CCAT website and YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks. And as always with events like this, there will be a feedback form that will come out towards the end of the week, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts and your views on the event and what we could maybe talk about moving forward. So I just wanted to give you a really quick overview to CCAT, just for those who maybe weren't able to attend yesterday. CCAT is a 2-year Interreg Ireland Wales funded project, and that's coming to an end at the end of 2019. No, started in 2019, coming to an end at the end of next month. And we have been working very much on the kind of focus topics of understanding coastal community adaptation to climate change and thinking about how coastal communities in Ireland and Wales, specifically the North Dublin coast around Portrane and Rush, so the Fingal coastline, and Pembrokeshire and Milford Haven and Pembroke Dock, how those case study communities are engaging with and adapting to climate change, or could adapt to climate change in the future. We are a multi-partner project crossing both countries and with participants from academia, including University College Dublin, UCD, which is a lead partner, and also partners from Cork and Cardiff, the universities, Fingal County Council, and then our case study kind of community organisations working very closely with Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum and Port of Milford Haven as well. So we've got a really mixed group of participants in this project. Yesterday I set out a small reminder of some of the key themes that came out of our event in November of last year. So it was our first online event, and we had a really successful 3 days covering quite different topics actually to the programme that we have for this year. But a lot of the same messages are actually starting to come out, and similar themes are being talked about by our speakers and through our Q&A sessions as well, which is really interesting to see. So just as a reminder of last year's key messages, they were things like, we have to act now. The urgency of adapting to climate change cannot be underestimated. And that message came out very clearly yesterday as well. And we talked a lot about the need for adequate and appropriate funding, for supportive and effective communication and engagement with stakeholders and communities, and kind of frame those as being one of the key challenges facing climate change adaptation and that kind of climate change action conversation moving forward. We really saw a call for interdisciplinarity and working not only across different academic disciplines, but very much across different policy areas and sectors. And again, those messages were echoed yesterday as well. We talked about there not being a one-size-fits-all solution and needing to really account for locally specific needs and engaging with communities to understand their priorities and their challenges as well. And crucially, the need to recognise the coast as a national asset. So really valuing our coastlines. And as I said yesterday, we got some of these kind of similar themes starting to come through again. So this idea of it being up to all of us to drive action forward, and that was very much a key message from Councillor Josh Bainan, who opened the session for us yesterday. So again, that speaks to that need for cross-sector, cross-policy and cross-discipline working. This idea of proactive management and proactive decision-making that takes account of modelling and the best available science and equal access to science and data to support our decision-making came out very clearly through James Fitton's presentation from Climate Ireland. And we started to hear topics of well-being and social justice. And again, that idea of kind of sustained engagement and the need for effective and meaningful communication. And I think we'll hear more about that today from our speakers this morning. This idea of fostering sense of ownership and including diverse voices came out very clearly through Isaiah Dava's talk from Climate Cymru. And this idea that COP26 that we're talking about and is very much on our horizon, it is a platform for change, but it's not an endpoint. And I think for us yesterday, that idea of this being an ongoing process and an ongoing conversation was very clear, and definitely for me, one of my take-home messages from the first day of the event. So I'm really excited to welcome our speakers for today's sessions. We have a very different theme that we're covering. We are talking about climate change education and youth voices is kind of the overarching theme. We do have a couple of other talks in there, which I'll introduce throughout the day. And again, as of yesterday, you will have a break. And we're not going to keep your brains going until lunchtime. We will have a break later this morning. As I said, again, if you have any questions for our speakers, please pop them in the Q&A box so we can kind of keep track of those and we can pose them to them either immediately after they speak or in the discussion panel at the end of the session. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And my first job is to hand over to Pauline Power, who's our CCAT project team member, who will be sharing one of the animation outputs that we produced as a team to really highlight some of the issues that are being faced on our Fingal coastline, our Fingal case study. This animation has been developed mainly through the work of our University College Cork and Marai and our Fingal County Council colleagues with some support from UCD as well. So Pauline, I'll hand over to you to share the animation.
Thanks, Emma.
I think the sea has gotten closer since last time I was here.
You're right. It didn't always look like this. The dunes were wider and bigger back in my day. That's the village when my granddad lived here. We loved playing on the dunes. There's the whole beach. People were worried about beach erosion then too. It's been a problem here for a long time.
What's that? Along the beach?
That's the wall they had to put in when I was your age, to protect the houses from the sea.
I was down on the beach earlier. Look, Grandad, here's how it looks now. What happened?
Show me that yoke. A long time ago, all of Ireland was covered by ice. We call it the Ice Age. Have you heard about it?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
But from 20,000 years ago, the planet started to get warmer, and these ice sheets melted. The sea moved away from the coast, exposing sandbanks and shallow areas. And the sea level gradually rose and fell over time. This back and forth movement pushed the sand towards the coast. 6,000 years ago, the sea rose higher than today, flooding many coastal areas around the world. From around 1,000 years ago, the sea level stabilized into what we see today. Then the waves and winds worked to develop the present-day coastline, forming dunes, beach barriers and bars that can be found in many parts of Ireland, like here in the borough.
Wow, I didn't know that. So it sounds like the coast is constantly changing. Am I right?
Yes, you're right, dear.
Hi, I'm home. Do you want a cup of tea?
Who's that?
Aunt May, she lives here now. Her house was damaged during the last storm.
What?
Every time there was a storm, the waves took away more of her garden until there was nothing between her house and the sea.
That's terrible.
That's called coastal erosion.
That sounds like climate change.
What?
Our teacher told us about climate change. Look, you know the greenhouse gases keep the earth warm, right? With Industrial Revolution, we started using coal and oil to generate electricity. And with cars and airplanes, the concentration of greenhouse gases has risen sharply. Every time greenhouse gases increase, the global temperature rises. And because it's warmer, glaciers and ice sheets melt and sea levels rise. There will be more storms, and they will get worse.
So that's why places on the coast, like the borough, are more exposed to flooding and erosion.
Yes, look. We need to stop temperatures rising, and we can only do that by reducing CO2 emissions. If we reduce emissions now, there is a hope that sea levels will rise less than half a metre by 2100. But if we keep using fossil fuels like we do now, the sea levels can rise by more than a metre by the end of the century.
And here in the borough, we're only a few metres above the current sea level.
And what about your house, Grandad?
The earth is constantly changing. Humans constantly adapt. We need to adapt now too. Take action. Change to keep up.
Could you build a wall?
We could. There are many options for how to deal with this. The government gave us this booklet a while ago. Some of these are made from concrete walls or rock armour. They help protect the land from erosion, but they're usually built on the beach to protect the land behind it, so the beach in front may disappear. These break up the waves before they hit the shore and reduce erosion. They also help to build up the sand on the beach. Normally, waves move a lot of sand along the beach, but these stop that happening so much. These ones are built on land above the high tide mark and protect lower down areas from flooding.
What if the sea rises more than expected and the coastal defences aren't strong enough? Would you have to move?
Well, there are many places in the world where people have already had to move away from the shore, and this will become more common as sea levels rise. It is called managed retreat. It's not easy and needs a lot of planning, but it can be done by the government working together with coastal communities to find the best solution for their place. In the long run, it's easier to work with nature than against it. Nature will always find its own balance, and our coast will continue to change, but it needs space to do so. Dunes and salt marshes, for example, can help protect our coast.
I can help too. We learned in school everyone can do something to fight climate change. Don't use fossil fuels, petrol, gas, oil.
But we need to travel. We need to heat our homes.
Use renewable energy instead.
Oh,
Use your bike when you can. Eat less meat. Don't dump litter. Recycle it.
those are some great ideas. I've reused these old barrels.
I saw that. There's lots we can all do. We come up with some great ideas when we all work together.
Indeed we do.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Pauline. That's the first time I've seen that whole video come together. It's great to see that. And I guess it really highlights, you know, the dynamics of the coast and some of those key messages that we mentioned for coming from yesterday, the fact that it's up to everybody to take action. There are small things we can do. And of course, there are bigger kind of systemic changes that need to happen. But I think for me also what was really interesting to think about is the importance of how we communicate with different audiences and the fact that we can use things like animation and creative approaches to really engage people with topics like climate change, like climate action, that are perhaps quite complicated for different groups of people. So it's great to see that, and it's brilliant to see that coming out of the team. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I will now move on to our first speaker of the day, Dr. Verity Jones, who's from the University of West of England. And Verity will be speaking to us about student perceptions of climate change and for some of her recent work that's explored those topics. So Verity, I'll hand over to you.
That's great, thanks Emma. Hopefully we'll be able to see this.
Perfect, thank you.
That's great. Well, hi everyone. As Emma said, I'm Dr. Verity Jones. I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of West of England in Bristol, where I work on the initial teacher education and the PGCE courses, delivering primary science and the humanities. I also support postgrads with doing their own research, focusing on all sorts of different things, but my own research is very much interested in social and environmental justice. And as part of that, I've been working with all sorts of young people all across the UK, as well as in different countries. I'm working with children in India at the moment. And my connection with this group as well is that I used to work as a teacher in Pembrokeshire, so I very much recognise the coasts that you're talking about. So young people have historically been silent, that's kind of silent voice in society. However, more recently, when we're talking about climate change and the issues that this group are interested in, their agency has begun to be more recognised within environmental politics. So we've got all sorts of young people becoming more and more visible within this landscape. Perhaps the one that we most resonate with might be Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future climate strikes. Now, they started in August 2018, and in preparation for today, I just wanted to see how quickly this activism and these young people's voices came through. So Greta started in August 2018 on her own. By November 2018, there were 17,000 students in 24 countries taking part in those strikes. By March 2019, there were 2 million young people taking part in 135 countries. And just 1 year on from that first strike, we have 3.6 million young people in 169 countries. So a huge amount of backing and support for making climate change education and climate politics more visible from the young people's perspective. But obviously Greta's not alone. We've got people like Shootaz Rosquet-Martinet, who actually came before Greta. Now, he was raised as a Mexican, a native people of Mexico, and in 2015 he was invited to speak at the UN at just 15 years old. He founded the Earth Guardians, which is a worldwide earth conservation organisation, and is one of the 21 people that are suing Donald Trump for failing to act on climate change. So a really big, yet still young person, a big activist in this area. Then across in Africa, we've got young people like Vanessa Nakate, who is a Ugandan, and she founded the Youth for Future Africa and Africa-based Rise Up movement. Closer to home in the UK and Bristol-based as it would be, we've also got Maya Rose Craig. She's a British Bangladeshi environmentalist, and as you can see, helped put together this book, We Have a Dream, meeting 30 young Indigenous people and people of colour protecting the planet. She is known as Bird Girl. So we also not only have these amazing kind of individuals that are really raising it, we've also got groups of people, and I'm sure many of you are aware of the work of Teach the Future, which is a youth-led group who are calling for a repurpose of the entire education system and not just in a few subjects, because within the national curriculum, and if we think about England for a moment, there's only reference to climate and environmental and sustainability specifically and explicitly in geography and science at Key Stage 3, and nothing before the age of 11. It's been really stripped out of the curriculum. I know that the Welsh curriculum is far more encompassing, and the new curriculum offers greater hope for this, but Teach the Future certainly offer a real voice for this. So against this backdrop of growing youth voice, research in this area still tends to focus on the relationship between young people's concern for the climate and their desire for action. So I'm quite often hearing young people declare, nothing is being done, no one cares, the government's doing nothing or not enough. I'm not hearing people necessarily acknowledging what is going on. So when Sky News commissioned a survey about climate change in March this year, I was really interested to see that, one, they were asking what key habits the people of Britain were willing to change to help tackle climate change. Another aspect was that they were asking what key habits were directly associated with the government strategies for climate mitigation. So they were linking people's habits with the policies that were actually in place and were actually trying to do something to mitigate these issues. And finally, they were asking whether people were able to identify key climate processes, key politicians, key meetings, such as COP26. Were these being recognised by the public? But even though it says it represents Britons, this didn't incorporate anybody, any voices of young people. They only asked people of 18 years and plus. And yet we've seen that young people have got a lot to say, and we need to kind of enable and facilitate that agenda and that agency. After getting ethical approval from my university, I worked with a group of 9 to 16-year-olds to rewrite the original survey for a younger audience. And then in May 10th, so we tried to turn it around really quickly, it was sent to schools and youth organisations across Britain as an online survey. It did have to be addressed to parents and carers due to consent issues because we're working with young people as young as 7. But both the adult and the young person were asked for consent. So after a 3-week period, we got over 1,200 responses, but out of that we had 985 responses that we could actually use, 985 responses that definitely had consent and were complete. Some of them weren't complete. So we wanted to look at, how were key terms used, what actions were young people prepared to take, who do young people hold responsible, and who do young people hold responsible for stopping and causing climate change. So these were the issues, and it very much mirrored the adult one. So if we just look at some of the feedback that we've got from this table, just as a quick, the blues are the 7 to 11-year-olds or kind of primary age school. The kind of orangey reddy colour is 12 to 18-year-olds, so that's kind of secondary, tertiary. And then the grey is the adult comparative data that we use from the Sky News commissioned survey by Holland. So of the terms that were least well understood, so we asked, did young people understand the concept of renewable energy, carbon emissions, fast fashion, greenhouse gases, COP26 and carbon footprinting? And what was interesting was the least well understood by all, both adults and young people, was fast fashion, so 23% and 59% respectively. But this was significantly more than the 44% of adults who understood it. Now, as an aside, the work I do with Bristol's Global Goal Centre, Fashion Revolution, and Pembrokeshire's Cumbroggie Futures, the work that I do with all of those all have a focus on fast fashion and are using this to think through the complex issues that relate to climate change and how young people can perhaps consider this, well, and the public for that matter, and how we can consider the threads that we wear linked to the socio-economic environmental issues that are going around the world. So least understood from this survey in terms of concepts and issues was, interestingly, as we can see from here, COP26. Adults, young people in May didn't know what it was, had no understanding of it. It would be really interesting actually right now whether those numbers went up. But it does suggest that, there was a lack of being informed. Of the adults, only 20% of 12 to 18-year-olds did feel that they were informed about it. So what is it that's happening here? Why aren't people more aware of those kind of big issues that are going on? The questions relating to what action young people would be prepared to take showed that they were more likely to support climate mitigation measures than adults. So that is interesting of itself. We've got a young population, and when we consider, we've got 11 million people across the UK that are kind of school age, and the survey that hopefully represents their voice is showing that they are far more committed to climate change mitigation than adults. More young people support the banning of new petrol and diesel cars. Now, that's really interesting and important because the government have got a green industrial strategy, and one of the targets for that is to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So we can see here that young people are backing that, adults not so much so. So there's also massive support for stopping the use of fossil fuel power stations. 77% of 7 to 11-year-olds and 84% of 12 to 18-year-olds support that. And again, this reflects some of the strategies and policies that are in place from the government. However, again, it contrasts significantly with 39% of adults. So young people, once again, are kind of saying, yeah, no, this is really important. So whilst they sit comfortably with the government's Green Industrial Plan, some of the actions the Green Industrial Plan are putting forward and putting into action don't sit comfortably with young people's perceptions and what they see as appropriate ways forward. So the plan supports the building of more nuclear power stations, and the results both of this survey and the adult survey highlight some concerns regarding this. So Hinkley Nuclear Power Station is on track to be completed by 2026. There's 2 nuclear generators that are going to be of use then, creating lots and lots of energy for the UK. But 29% of 7 to 11-year-olds, raising to 49% of 12 to 18-year-olds, do not think that nuclear power should be the way forward, that we shouldn't be going down that road. Interestingly, 35% of adults don't support it either. So very interesting again that we've got a government policy, and yet the voices of young people and where they're thinking action should be taken isn't necessarily in alignment with that. Another question was, who is responsible for climate change? Now, whilst business and factories are seen in both the older and younger categories as the main cause of climate change, it's worth noting that nearly 14% of both groups felt it was ordinary people. And I know that the next speaker is going to be talking about eco-anxiety, but I really think that this needs to be highlighted. So linked to this response of who has the biggest role to play in mitigation. So, whilst 35% of young people identified governments of rich countries, 30% said that, it is ordinary people. So if young people are putting pressure on themselves to sort out climate change, feeling that it's their fault, they are these ordinary people. And I've been doing workshops and activities and all sorts of education activities, as well as research with young people as young as 6 and 7, and children are saying that they're feeling guilty, angry, upset, depressed, worried, anxious, and we're getting this kind of overwhelming emotional response from what's going on, and we really need to be considering that. So young people were asked how much they trusted the government. That was another one of the questions. So with numbers reducing significantly as they got older, 12 to 18-year-olds thought significantly less trust in the government than either 7 to 11-year-olds or adults. So here we see the trust in the government, it's not really very high. And I think when we ask young people, you know, is enough being done? And they say no, I think this is where it's coming from. There's no trust that actually actions are going to be taken. So the final question that was asked was if young people felt it was possible to sort out climate change. You know, this is a big question. Do you think it's too late? Are we actually going to manage it? And it is perhaps hopeful that such a large percentage of positive, you know, well, we've got, is it possible? We've got 78.7, so 79% of 7 to 11-year-olds, 72% of 12 to 18-year-olds say, yes, it is possible. But again, I urge you to look at the 19% that either think it's not possible or they don't know, because such uncertainty or a sense of doom needs to be acknowledged, and we need to really support young people in navigating that. So in summary, there are differences between the responses of young people and adults with regard their response to climate and what they feel is appropriate. And there are differences between the age groups and also needs to be acknowledged and facilitated. Some processes associated with climate change are understood better than others. And, you know, an example of that is fast fashion. And there's definitely a lack of trust or knowledge about the government's response to climate change. What's interesting is as we run up to COP26, I'm seeing more and more in the media about, okay, what is being done? And that's such relief to see that we're celebrating, you know, some of the things that are working and some of the things that we're working on. So there's inconsistent support for some of the government's green strategies, for example, that kind of shift to building more nuclear power stations. And there's also a significant number of young people who feel responsible for climate change, you know, and those issues that are really big. So from the report, which can be found on the Global Goals Centre website, and there's also going to be, we're just about to submit a paper to be published, but the recommendations, or some of them, are that perhaps we need to think about having child speak versions of government documents that can be made accessible and used within education, whether that be formal or informal education, and celebrate and signpost more of the positive projects that are going on. So young people don't feel like nothing's happening, that young people don't feel that it's their responsibility, but actually they can be part of these larger organisations and movements and be part of that positive shift. We need greater consultation with young people in climate change policy and development. After all, our 9-year-olds by 2030, when, you know, sustainable development goals and all of these policies come into fruition, they're of voting age. This is their journey that we really need to be thinking about and definitely consulting and listening and acting upon that listening as well. We do need to provide space in teacher training courses to explore the pedagogies, the way we teach, as well as the subject knowledge to support climate change education progressively through the phases. I think it's a real difficulty as to how the teachers approach these really difficult issues from an early age, and where and how and what strategies are appropriate as we go through, and not to have it just within perhaps the usual science and geography lessons. I know we've got amazing good practice all across Britain about how people are embedding these issues. And finally, having space in the curriculum, most importantly perhaps, to explore feelings about these issues so that we can support our young people with their mental health and well-being as well. So I hope you found that interesting, and if there are any questions, and if I've got time, I'm more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you so much, Verity, for such a fascinating and important presentation to kind of kick off the conversations that we'll be having today. I think those ideas and those kind of discussions around the role of emotions and the importance of focusing on that, and also thinking about how we help our teachers and how we help the wider education and within formal education. We're doing some some work within the CCAT project to explore the differences in the curriculum in Ireland and Wales. And because of time, we are quite limited to focusing on science and geography, as you pointed out, but I think it's a really important conversation for us to have as we continue to think about how we address climate change and support climate action moving forward. And what's great about today's session is we will be hearing from some of those voices that Verity mentioned, some of those youth voices and students that we don't often get to hear from. So we will definitely be hearing from them later in the session. I hope you can all stick around for those parts. We are a little tiny bit over, but I'm going to ask one of the questions that's come in the Q&A before we move on to our second speaker. There's a question from Greg Guthrie, who's asked about the information you put up around cars, and Verity, you might have seen it, but it's just whether or not on the use of cars, does this reflect that it's the parents who have to, as he says, cart their children around, and are worried how we do this without a car. Younger people can perhaps disassociate the practicalities of those sorts of journeys and that they are currently passengers, so they can agree with the removal of cars as a mode of transport in principle, but perhaps aren't thinking about those practicalities that might be impacting in terms of everyday life. So do you have any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. And it is really tricky, actually, because some of the questions were a bit like that. Some of the questions were about heating and you know, as a child, it's really difficult to engage with those perhaps. However, I would welcome the youth participants today, if they're available, to talk about that and from their position, because obviously, you know, I'm an adult and I'm not youth, but lots of work is being undertaken on sustainable transport. My background's in sustainable transport, so I know that there's a big push for shifts in sustainable transport. But I would also say that the government policy is to ban the sale of petrol, new petrol and diesel cars, not to ban the sale of cars. So that kind of changes it slightly. And, you know, hopefully we will get this, and it will be a systemic but gradual shift, hopefully, towards more sustainable travel options that are going to be more easily enabled. As a parent of 2 children myself, I am quite aware of the taxi service to which I have to undertake quite regularly. Yes.
It's an important consideration for all parents, I'm very sure. Thank you so much. There are a couple of other questions in the chat box, but we'll come to those later on. Thank you again for such a fabulous presentation, and we will now move on to our second speaker, who is Dean Eaton from the Dublin Bay Biosphere Partnership. So Dean's going to be talking to us about some of the work that the partnership have been doing around engaging communities and engaging with schools and young people. So Dean, I will hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. Verity, I just wanted to say, before taking up the post as Biosphere Coordinator, I was Environmental Awareness Officer for a local authority, and we ran an eco-conference for 10 years, which engaged young people and explored their fears and whatnot else. So, you know, a lot of work is going on in that area, and certainly, you know, we had a lot of success engaging young people over here. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And I am going to pull up my presentation. Hopefully I can get a confirmation that you can all see that.
Yeah, fine.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So we have a great image there of the River Liffey flowing down through Dublin City and out into Dublin Bay. Dublin Bay is a UNESCO biosphere, and not a unique biosphere, but certainly an unusual biosphere. On the top left-hand side, you have Ireland's Eye. In the foreground of that, you have Howth. You have North Bell Island, the original home of the biosphere, and over to the right, you've Dún Laoghaire and Dalkey and Killiney. So it covers a big area. It's over 300 kilometres of biosphere. And this is a couple of maps that showcase our biosphere. Now we've got the map on the left-hand side, which shows the mosaic system that we have here. The original biosphere was North Bell Island, but with the review of the biosphere in 2014, it was felt that it didn't fit with the UNESCO program, so the biosphere was expanded, and we have quite an unusual mosaic pattern in that we've lots of different protected areas that make up the biosphere, surrounded by their buffer and transition zones. On the right hand side, we've got a youth-friendly map just to engage young people and to help them understand some of the activities on offer. You know, biospheres are, well, I want to talk about this, sorry. Within the Dublin Bay Biosphere, we have over 300,000 people living within the biosphere. And that brings certain challenges, but it also brings opportunities to engage with our communities. So biospheres bring no new legal requirements, but they're managed for people and nature. So we want people to be out there and we want people to be enjoying what we have, this magnificent, internationally important nature reserve, or nature reserves in our case. But like I say, by having those people mixed with our nature reserve, it brings certain challenges. So biospheres have three primary functions. The first is conservation. We have to protect what we have. Really important that we protect what these wonderful nature reserves, but it's also places for learning, supporting education, supporting research, better understanding what's happening locally and in a global context, and sharing that knowledge with our wider community. But it's also for supporting a sustainable economy. So we understand that people work in and around our biosphere and can, if we work with them, contribute positively towards the biosphere. So this is a phenomenal image showing the rich biodiversity that we have in Dublin Bay. If you were to see this image promoting any location, it's a place you'd want to go and see. We're so lucky to have this on a capital city's doorstep. And that's really quite spectacular when you consider that it's right on the doorstep of not only the capital city, but Ireland's busiest port, where 50% of all goods coming into the country pass through the port. And that has to be managed effectively. Now there's 6 partner organisations that contribute towards the management of the biosphere. So you have 3 local authorities in Dublin City, Dunleary Rafton County Council and Fingal County Council. And one of our speakers has visitors from Fingal County Council and will be given an update on his work later. But you also have Fulch Ireland, the National Park and Wildlife Service and Dublin Port. And all of these contribute towards the management of the biosphere by working collaboratively. I mentioned about the biosphere as a great place for people to visit, and we want people to do that and relax and enjoy themselves and maybe not relax. So we have kite service. Dublin is one of the best places for kite surfing in Europe, but we work with local business to try and deliver important key messages. So one of our biosphere business supporters, a business that has signed our biosphere charter, which commits them to operate in a sustainable manner, is Pure Magic. And they work with their community to deliver really important information about how they can lessen their impact on our natural habitats. So they tell kite surfers that during low tides, to not kite surf in a particular area where our seals haul out and recharge their energies. So it's great that we have these kind of collaborations ongoing. We undertake a lot of research. This research was instigated by the 3 local authorities to study Brent geese and to understand what's happening, with them, with their feeding habits, where they visit, what they're doing. And it helps build up a picture, which then helps inform planning processes. So I've got a short video to show you. And this video was produced to actually share with our wider community to help them understand the importance of the research, what we learn and how we can best benefit from that. So hopefully you can see this and hear it.
These are Brent geese.
Oh, there's more coming in.
How many?
Like loads. At least 80 of them.
And this is Tess Handby.
They're just doing that landing thing where they hover and then they stick their feet out and then they're coming in and they're turning around and they're landing. Yes!
A PhD student at the University of Exeter Penrith campus in Cornwall. Tess is working in collaboration with the Irish Brent Goose Research Group on a project aimed to quantify patterns of urban habitat use and the behaviour of Brent geese during the winter in Dublin Bay.
So there's definitely a family out there from this year.
Tessa's research is part of the Dublin Bay Brent Geese Project, which is funded by 3 local authorities: Dún Laoghaire County Council, Dublin City Council and Fingal County Council. Each year, the parents and young birds complete one of the longest migrations undertaken by any waterfowl species from the high Arctic Canada. After a 5,000 kilometre journey crossing Iceland and Northern Ireland, they return to the salt marsh habitats within the Dublin Bay Biosphere. The nearby estuaries provide a favourable food source by day and a place to roost at night. The Dublin Bay Biosphere is a unique area that is internationally recognised for hosting many migratory species over the winter, while sitting alongside a densely urban landscape. North Bull Island was designated a UNESCO Biosphere in 1981 and expanded to include the whole of Dublin Bay in 2015. The zone covers 300 kilometres squared, including the areas of ecological values and the communities where over 350,000 people live and work. Preserving the biosphere as a refuge for both resident and overwintering wildlife requires evidence-based sustainable management programmes, a key practice for all biospheres.
3, 2, 1, fire.
Catching birds to ring them and place GPS trackers on adults allows the team to record the number of urban sites the birds use and identify any effects or consequences from spending the winter in an urban landscape.
Have you got an adult, Drew?
Leave that one for now.
One here.
These two might be a pair.
1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 4.
When they first arrive, the Brent geese feed on green seaweeds and other plants on the shoreline. They quickly run out of resources as plants have very little to no growth over the winter. Therefore, they gradually move from the intertidal and salt marsh area to feeding on coastal grasslands, sports pitches and other open spaces all around Dublin.
So once you'll take a bird out of the sack, it'll come to processing, we'll put Darvix on it, then it will get more stun, so head, bill, wing, weight. And then if it's a GPS bird, it will come to me and I'll put a GPS tag on it.
The research identifies the benefits and challenges of the biosphere. It also tries to better understand why the geese leave the specially protected areas to travel inland and graze on man-made infrastructures. The results will help the biodiversity officers provide informed advice and implement positive management practices. As human beings, we are part of the ecosystem and responsible for its ecological health. The challenges and benefits of Dublin Bay Biosphere are many. A scientific approach to the biosphere will help inspire a positive future by connecting people and nature.
Okay, I hope you found that interesting. Like I say, this video and the other work that we're doing is part of the strategy to be able to communicate effectively with the public and to get them to engage with the biosphere and realize that we have something that's really worth protecting, and help us manage the biosphere more effectively. Ongoing from that, we have other collaborations. So we have young people working with local NGOs to understand the bird species in their area. So this is Ricky from Birdwatch Ireland. Understand what they need and why they're operating in their area, and to feel a connection with them, so that they will help us protect these important species. Other collaborations with Birdwatch Ireland identified the important sites that we have within the biosphere for breeding birds. So here are terns breeding on pontoons in Dublin Bay that have been left by our other partner, the Dublin Port Authority. But in addition, the Dublin Port Authority bring out pontoons during the breeding season to enable more birds to breed. So it's understanding, what's required through that research. We want to give young people a voice. I was listening to a presentation there recently from Miriam Burami of UNESCO, of the UNESCO Man in Biosphere Programme, and it's important that young people are given the opportunity to express their interest in nature, in climate change, and so on and so forth. So these young people worked on a video that's available on our YouTube channel to showcase their passion for our natural heritage. We've also delivered a Brent Geese Ambassador Program. So these children learn about the importance of Brent geese, why they're such an internationally important species, and the work that needs to be done to help protect them. So the Brent geese use their local community fields to feed later in the season. And we've got these fantastic ambassadors that are there to help us make sure that those feeding sites remain long into the future. During lockdown, it was a little bit more difficult to connect with our local community, so we organised a series of webinars. So we had a homeschool webinar series, followed by a primary school webinar series when the children returned to school. Now, during a homeschool webinar series, we had 500 individuals sign up to the webinar, and it would have been way oversubscribed. We had a limit on the amount that we could connect with. So there's a real passion for connecting with biospheres, connecting with nature. So we had trained educators delivering workshops on a variety of themes. We had themes such as wildlife detectives. So children had the opportunity through presentations and through short videos to understand what nature is in their area, and to feel a real passion for it, a real connection with what's happening around them, what can be found around them. And that was followed by wildlife champions, how to be a wildlife champion. So we gave the children the opportunity to actually take what they've learned and do something to protect our wildlife. So that was an important activity. And it was a whole series of activities that connected with children in different ways. So we looked at different learning styles and catered for those needs, and that was important. We've also produced, in partnership with Scouting Ireland, a Dublin Bay Biosphere Award. Now, this is an award that encourages young people to understand what they have around them, learn about the processes that are going on, and then take action to help protect our biosphere. And again, I have another short video to show you.
Biospheres are places shared by people in nature. They are places where we can learn about wildlife and how best to protect it. They are also places to have fun and play. Sadly, some humans cause problems by scaring wildlife, trampling plants and leaving litter. But by understanding these problems, we can all work together to help protect our beautiful biosphere.
We want to challenge you to earn your own Biosphere badge. To do so, you'll need to complete these tasks.
Take some time, go to an open space, lie on the ground and open your senses to the experience of nature. Breathe in the fresh air, look at the clouds and the nature around you, listen to the birds call, the buzzing of the bees, the wind blowing in the trees, the smell of the grass and the flowers, the touch and the feel of the leaves, trees and grass. Taste some edible berries and fruit. Slow down, explore and observe, discover the awe and wonder of nature, discover habitats, wildlife and its interconnections, nature's colour palette and textures, how the elements of the sun, wind and rain impact the landscape, and why open spaces are special. Record your observations through maps and drawings, and think about how we all can protect the natural biosphere around us.
The Biosphere badge is comprised of 3 parts. Part 1, getting outside and using our senses to explore nature. Part 2, learning about what's happening in nature and how humans can impact the environment both positively and negatively. Part 3, take action to protect the biosphere. The Biosphere badge is a challenge to get outside, explore, learn and take action to protect our biosphere.
I was delighted to award our first badges to a group of Beaver Scouts there at the weekend. So these young people took an activity, basically did a walk up on Howth, learnt about their impacts from litter, and then they did a big litter collection. So it was great that they were able to connect with the biosphere in that way. Other activities that we've done, we've run a series of Try Biosphere webinars. This is in partnership with the Isle of Man Biosphere and the Kerry Biosphere. And these are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO programme. And it's sharing the beauty of our biospheres to a wider audience. The first of our webinars was Birds of the Biosphere, which was delivered in partnership with Birdwatch Ireland. And we had 250 participants attend that webinar, and that's been viewed well over 1,000 times on YouTube. And this is a great way to share what we have, to get people to connect with the biosphere and then hopefully take action to help protect it. In addition to the Try Biosphere webinar series, we've run a Biosphere Challenge. I don't have an image for that, unfortunately, but the Biosphere Challenge was aimed at community groups to undertake a 10-week challenge to become a little bit more sustainable. Now, the first challenge was very simple, do nothing. We're just asking people to put away the lawnmower, sit in the garden or sit in an area where surrounded by nature and spend 10 minutes listening and connecting with what's around you. And each of the challenges build up to help people become more sustainable, to learn about sustainability. And as part of that program, we ran a Rambling House event. So the Rambling House is where people can come together and share their stories, share their connections with nature through poetry, through music, through storytelling. And our next Rambling House event is taking place Friday. So you'd all be very welcome. We'd love to see a few more people there. And sorry, going back to the Try Biosphere webinars, the next Try Biosphere webinar, because these are monthly events, is taking place on the 28th of October, where the 3 biodiversity officers will be sharing their passion for ecology, but also showcasing some of the work that they're doing to help protect their natural environments. So we've got some amazing images. These images were taken as part of an underwater photography competition, and it just shows the fantastic variety of life that we have in Dublin Bay. Now, just to finish off, one more video, and this is showcasing the connection with businesses and nature. Okay, hope that was interesting, Emma.
Thank you so much, Dean. Loads of great examples of different ways of engaging with communities and the different projects that you're involved in. So if anybody is based in the Dublin area, please do get in touch with Dean, or if you want us to put you in touch and get involved in all of those projects, there's so much that you can get involved with. We are a little bit over time, so Dean, what I'm going to do is keep your questions till the end, if that's okay, because I know that Catriona unfortunately has to leave us a little bit early today, so I'm going to invite Catriona to come on so that she can do her talk. Hi, Catriona. Thank you again, Dean. So Catriona, Dr. Catriona Mellor is here to talk to us, as Verity said, around topics of climate anxiety and eco-anxiety and how that is manifesting itself in young people and children. And as Verity said in her talk, that's something we really need to be aware of and conscious of as we continue to think about topics relating to climate action, both now and in the future. So Catriona, I'm going to hand over to you, just so you're aware I can see your presenter view rather than your full slides at the moment. Perfect. There you go. Thank you very much. Oh. I'll hold on.
Hi there, sorry, I was just...
That's okay, don't worry.
The mute button. Can you see the right view, or have I've come
I can see your PowerPoint.
Yeah,
all PowerPoint now. Yeah.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's been so great to hear Dean and Verity talk as well, and I think you'll see there's some overlaps in what I'm going to be talking about. So thank you for inviting me. I'm Catriona Mellor, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I've been working in an inpatient hospital for adolescents with serious mental health problems, and I've also been working with the Royal College of Psychiatrists in their response to the eco-crisis, and I'm just going to call it eco-crisis if that's okay for today, for this talk, so the climate and ecological emergency. Through that work, I've been exploring how to bring nature-based practice and intervention into our mental health services, so some of that nature connectedness stuff that Dean was mentioning, as well as investigating how the eco-crisis will impact our young people's mental health. And that's the topic I'm going to be talking about today. So I've got about 15 minutes to touch on these areas. I'm going to start with a very brief summary, sort out my desk here, of the various ways that mental health and well-being can be impacted by climate change. Sorry. Then I'll focus on the different climate emotions that people are describing more and more, mentioning terms that you may have heard, such as eco-anxiety and climate grief. And importantly, how we can see these, they can be distressing, but we can see these as useful responses that we need to learn from and not get rid of. And then I'm going to spend a portion of today sharing findings from a big study that I've been involved in that asked children and young people across the world what they're thinking and feeling. And to come to Verity's point, this was age 16 plus because of various ethical reasons to do with the study. And then I'll end with a little bit of what we know about what can help. So for simplicity, we can split the psychological impacts of climate change into three main areas. There are the direct or acute impacts on mental health, following, for example, extreme weather events like storms or flooding, where we see an increased prevalence of things like anxiety, depression, and PTSD. There are the more gradual, sometimes indirect effects on mental health through the longer term consequences that have already been mentioned today, such as sea level rise, but also things like drought and other changes in land use. And these will impact mental health and well-being of children, young people, but also us all, through the stress of things like food insecurity, conflict, displacement, and would be exacerbated by disruption to any health or education infrastructure that might occur as well. And like we saw or we see during the pandemic, the health impacts of climate change and the mental health impacts are going to fall most heavily on the most vulnerable and amplify existing inequalities. The tip of this pyramid refers to our emotional and psychological response to the overarching threat, so this existential threat that we're all facing that comes with the eco-crisis. So how do we feel about the crisis, whether or not we've had direct experience of catastrophe? And this is where words like eco-distress, eco-anxiety, climate grief, solastalgia, these sort of words are increasingly coming into common language. And the focus of the rest of this talk is mainly on that bit, on the tip of that pyramid, our psychological response to the threat of climate change or the eco-crisis. There are many names being used to describe this pain that we feel for the world, for what is happening to our home, our planet. In the Royal College of Psychiatrists, we chose eco-distress as a term to use. Eco-anxiety is widely used among young people, whatever we call it, it's important to understand, like our speakers have mentioned previously, that it's real and represents actually an adaptive response to the threat we face collectively. The crisis is a hugely complex one to face, isn't it? It's enormous, it's devastating, it's beyond our individual control, despite what some people may think where the responsibility lies. We know that as a species we have caused this issue, and we know that we're not yet doing what's necessary to protect ourselves or our children, the world, or future generations. So it does make complete sense when people, young people or otherwise, describe a complex mix of changing feelings, which can include some of the ones that I've listed here. Things like angry or helpless, sad, panicky, outraged, numb, sometimes hopeful, just a real mixture. But it's really, really important to say that this is not an illness or a diagnosis. And I think sometimes people think that by giving something like this a term, a label like eco-anxiety, that might be a risk or might be what we're implying. But we have to be really clear that these responses make sense in a species whose habitat and existence is threatened. And we're living, aren't we, with this awful uncertainty about whether we're going to take sufficient action in time to reduce the spread of the more extreme impacts we're already seeing. And of course, the capacity to be in touch with reality, with external reality, has long been regarded as an indication of mental health. So we can say it's healthy to be frightened in a crisis. And I mean, I even see this outpouring of strong alarm, particularly among our young people, as almost like one of the final warning calls for our species. So what is this message? What's this anxiety saying? What message is this distress giving us all? It's that we need to take note and respond to the threat that's causing the distress. And the thing that we need to respond to first and foremost is the eco-crisis itself. And of course, we also need to support our young people and each other with the distress that comes with that. My colleague, climate psychotherapist and researcher Caroline Hickman, who you originally invited to do this talk today and sadly couldn't make it, has developed a framework to describe eco-anxiety in more detail based on some of the qualitative work that she's done with many young people and children over years. And I think it's probably fair to say that everyone, or certainly most people, would have a bit of what we might call eco-anxiety when they see and absorb the tragedy of the crisis that's unfolding in front of our eyes. But as you see, it can really vary. So not only do the emotions, the types of emotion vary, like we saw on the previous slide, but the intensity of the emotions can vary day to day for one person or between people. From mild, where people feel a bit upset, but can be reassured and they can focus on optimism and the hope that maybe there'll be technological solutions that will get us out of this mess, all the way through to really severe, overwhelming feelings where thoughts about the future are negative and are intrusive and affect your sleep. Can't really get any sort of respite from these thoughts, and there's sort of this lack of belief that other people will be able to sort things out. And so we can see, and people can change, obviously, go in and out of any of these stages, and we can see that the type of support we would offer someone will need to vary. And as I mentioned at the end of the talk, there's a lot of support available. So I also work with Caroline and a team of researchers to find out more about this phenomenon of eco-distress or eco-anxiety. The results of this large study were first shared a month ago, and it's made a really big impact. There have been over 1,000 articles in the media, and it's been discussed at the highest political level. And really importantly for us as a group of researchers, young people have reached out directly to say thank you. The research team brought together researchers, clinicians and youth advocates from the USA, UK, Canada and Finland. And the survey was funded by an online campaigning organisation that you may have heard of, Avaz. The survey was completed by 10,000 children and young people aged 16 to 25 from 10 countries across the world. And that was countries in the global north and also in the global south. And we we surveyed 1,000 children in each of these countries, including Brazil, India, Nigeria, and the Philippines. And I'm just going to run through some of the findings in detail as it gives a good feel for the breadth and depth and strength of feelings in young people in these 10 countries across the world. So the dark bar here represents how much of the overall sample of 10,000 young people and children feel that what they think and feel about climate change interferes with their daily activities, such as sleeping, eating and working. So you can see that's getting on for half. And the colourful bar at the bottom represents how worried they are that, quote, climate change threatens people and planets. Red and orange show extremely and very worried, and yellow shows moderately worried. So 8 out of 10 people surveyed are at least moderately worried. And on the next slide, I'll just show how this is represented for the 10 countries separately. And we don't have time to go into the detail, and I imagine the text is quite small for you. But one thing I'd like to point out in the middle here, fifth down is India, then Nigeria and Philippines with the highest. So the dark bar again is, does this impact on your daily functioning? And the colourful bar, the reds, orange and yellows, is how worried are you? So these countries, these responses from these countries show that this is far from being a first world problem. And in fact, the greatest impact is shown in these countries from the global south. The survey then asked how people feel when they think about climate change, with 2/3 of the sample reporting feeling sad and afraid, closely followed by anxious then angry. These are really tricky emotions to be dealing with. As Verity mentioned, least reported emotions were optimistic and indifferent. We then asked the respondents about their thoughts about climate change. And these slides show the figures for the whole sample worldwide and also the UK sample breakdown. So over half think they won't have access to the same opportunities that their parents had. Over half think their family's security will be threatened. Over half think that the things they most value will be destroyed. 8 out of 10 think that people have failed to take care of the planet. 3/4 think that the future is frightening. And 4 out of 10 are hesitant to have children because of climate change. And over half think that humanity is doomed. So even just reading those statements out now is distressing for me. And just to acknowledge that how many young people are growing up at this time, developing their sense of identity and aspirations for the future with these beliefs as a backdrop. And to add insult to injury, nearly half of children and young people have been dismissed or ignored by other people. So that could be peers or it could be adults in their lives when they try to talk about their thoughts and feelings of climate change. This is something that we do have within our control to reduce from right now. And then finally in the study, we moved on to what young people thought and felt about government response. And so on this graph, you can see the different questions we asked. Do we believe that my government and other governments are? And the red bars are yes, the blue bars are no. And just to summarize that, the majority, sort of about 2/3 in each question, are disappointed. So over 60% saying that governments are failing young people. I think this again mirrors what Verity was saying, and can't be trusted. That they're not protecting the planet and people, and they're not acting according to science. And when asked how government's responses made them feel, children and young people most often use these sort of words. And analysis of the data that we got showed that distress appears to be greater when people believe that government response is inadequate. So eco-distress is made worse by inaction of powerful players. Importantly, this means that when children and young people feel that decision makers are taking the problem seriously, they are able to feel reassured, valued, protected, and hopeful, despite still being worried about climate change. So the main messages from the study are that the emotional impacts of the climate crisis itself are very significant. Climate change, both directly and indirectly, plus or climate anxiety or inadequate government response are all chronic stressors to us all, and they'll threaten the mental health and well-being of children and young people globally. These results act as a warning to governments and adults around the world and underscores an urgent need for greater responsiveness to children and young people's concerns. So that listening and giving a voice that Verity was talking about, and then responding in a helpful way, more in-depth research, and of course, maintaining that focus, not on individual responsibility, but on powerful decision makers and pushing as we can for immediate action on climate change. And just to say, this isn't just an issue for mental health professionals. We all need to be aware of the toll these times are taking on our children, young people, but also ourselves. Otherwise, we're at risk of burnout and overwhelm. And for any climate solutions to be sustainable, emotional health and resilience need to be included as priority outcome measures. So just to finish off, I've got 3 more slides to just talk about what helps. There's a lot of research going into to how to respond and how to support children and young people. So just to reiterate again, the strong message is that the thing that will help most on all levels, including climate anxiety, is drastic and just climate action by the world's most powerful. And all of us have a role to play in that, don't we, in putting pressure on the system to change by how we shop and vote and by what we say using any platforms of influence we may hold. It's important to raise awareness of the mental health and psychological impacts. This has value in itself, even before we do anything about it. And we also need to be prepared for an increase in mental health difficulties as the crisis unfolds. And then when it comes to supporting ourselves or someone else or a child or young person with eco-distress, it's not about curing it or making it go away. And I think it helps in some ways to think of it maybe as support similar to that you may give when coming to terms with a chronic or terminal illness diagnosis. The problem is big and it's not going to go away, and the feelings won't go away either. So we are pulling together resources and communities and guidance for how we can help each other navigate difficult emotional territory. And there's resources for scientists, for clinicians, for parents, for teachers, and for children and young people themselves. Taking action and empowering young people to take action can help, as long as people feel this is a collective and not individual responsibility. So otherwise it can feed that guilt that Verity was talking about. And any action needs to be balanced by sort of emotional support. So people need to make sure they're looking after themselves emotionally too. And maybe that's where some of that nature connectedness stuff that Dean was talking about, or whatever people do to make themselves better comes in. This is a diagram that some people may find helpful to show that coming to terms with this sort of unfolding crisis is a process, a sort of transition. And it shows why it might be helpful to face the difficult feelings that we may have, rather than trying to resist them, which is something I often try and do, actually. If we can accept that it's normal and healthy to have extreme feelings in response to a threat we face, then we can accept that a lot of us are likely to feel sometimes strong feelings of fear, sadness, grief, guilt when we think about our planet. And I know it can be tempting to push them away by keeping busy, and often we may find ourselves doing lots of action, which can be helpful. That can result in helpful actions and can help us feel better in the short term. However, it's likely that those difficult feelings will sort of be lying in wait, making us feel stressed, perhaps even growing stronger. And maybe they're ready to overwhelm us when we can't keep up the busyness for one reason or another. So facing the emotions and letting ourselves feel the grief and anxiety. So on this diagram, it's sort of metaphorically going down into the difficult emotions. And before we can then come back up and through is a way of building emotional resilience. It's a way we often learn more about ourselves, particularly that we can cope with these feelings and therefore don't need to waste energy pushing them away. But this is all really difficult to do alone. And this is where a lot of the support out there comes in via online resources, groups, or therapy if that's required. It's often helping people through this process. And finally, really finally, another thing that perhaps can help is in blue here, changing how we frame, excuse me, eco-anxiety, because it is often seen as a completely bad thing that needs to be avoided or overcome or prevented. And not only is this going to be increasingly difficult as our climate worsens, but also this would mean negating the important messages it gives us. And I think it's quite useful to reframe it as a sign of compassion and care and of being able to face reality and to be awake to what's going on. And once we're awake and aware, then we can do stuff about it, can't we? Then we can respond. And a lot of people are saying now that to be apathetic or numb or indifferent in the face of the eco crisis could be seen as the more negative, dangerous response of our times. So again, this is not to deny that the feelings of eco-anxiety can be experienced as very uncomfortable and at times overwhelming. But it's to try and recognize that if we can start to experience this collectively, so not as individuals trying to cope alone with these really draining, debilitating feelings, but all of us coming together, sharing how we feel, then we're able to channel the energy that comes with the fear and the pain into a drive and a motivation to do things differently. And I think that's the time when we're likely to feel an even we sort of feel more alive, a greater sense of connection to what we love and value, which then feeds that drive and motivation more. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope I've got the balance there between acknowledging that it's a really tough time and there are going to be some difficult feelings, but balancing that with the message that the more we share, the more we understand, the more we talk about this, the more we're going to be able to learn more about how to support ourselves, our young people, and each other. And the final 3 bullet points on this slide are links to various types of resources that are out there that might be a good starting point for people if they want to know more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catriona, for a fascinating and at times quite sobering talk. I think I was with you when you said reading out those statements was quite difficult for you. It felt very difficult to hear some of those points, and I commented out loud a couple of times. I'm sure I wasn't the only one, so I'm glad I was on mute. I appreciate the idea of reframing how we talk about eco-anxiety, so that it's not always seen as a negative, that it's actually an opportunity for recognizing that connection and perhaps that opportunity to build, while still, I suppose, validating the reality of those emotions and recognizing that they are valid responses to a very challenging time. And I think we've all seen that in the last year and a half as well. If you look at how a lot of people felt in response to COVID as well. So thank you very much. I know Catriona has to leave, so there is a question for her in the Q&A, and actually because we're a little bit behind schedule, what I'm going to do is then call a break. So we'll still be having our break at about 12:30, and Kathelijne, our next speaker, will speak at the beginning of our next session. So Catriona, there was a question for you from someone who's asked, do you think the media has played a role in exacerbating eco-distress because of the focus on doom and gloom messaging as opposed to actions that can be taken to mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts?
Thank you. That's a really great question. I think I certainly think media has a role to play now. I'm not sure how much they've exacerbated what we're seeing in children and young people, because ultimately children and young people are managing to look this crisis more squarely in the face, I think, than a lot of other people. So it is, whether there was doom and gloom coverage or not, I think young people would be looking at the state of the world and the state of action on the climate crisis, and they would see a very frightening scenario, and they would feel the eco distress, or whatever we want to call it. However, I do think that that once we acknowledge that, it's really important to be at one point acknowledging the reality of the situation. So I do think it's good that media covers what's happening. So because I think awareness has increased since the media have been covering things more comprehensively. Although there's obviously still a bias in which areas of the world climate events get covered, aren't there? But absolutely, I really think now that there needs to be a lot of space made for climate solutions, connecting together all the amazing, creative, beautiful grassroots movements that are happening, so that people, once they're faced with the reality and can understand the situation, know that there is hope, and that there's a lot that anybody can do, lots of people to connect to. And importantly, we're also messaging that this isn't an individual's responsibility. We've all got a little tiny bit of responsibility because we're all little tiny bits of the picture, but the massive share of the responsibility needs to be with the most powerful decision makers of the world.
Thank you. And I think that really speaks to that kind of graph that you showed, that if we promote those positive messages and those solutions and those champion those actions that people are taking to show that there is hope, there are opportunities for people to get engaged and kind of help people come back up that kind of journey, I think is probably very, very useful. And I agree as well that the focus on individual behaviour change, I think, is sometimes skewed some of that conversation, and I think there definitely needs to be that focus on systematic change at a much higher level. So it's great to hear you bring up those topics as part of this conversation as well. Thank you very much. As I said, Catriona has to leave from the session this morning. So if there are any other questions for her, please still pop them in the chat box, because other speakers may be able to answer them or have a view on some of them. And also we can perhaps go to Catriona and Caroline as well, who we spoke with, who Catriona mentioned, at a later date, and try and kind of create that connection and answer some of those questions for you. As I said, we're going to shift the programme a little bit so we can give you a talk, because I think we've heard a lot of quite kind of deep, big discussion so far this morning. So we are going to take a break now until 20 to 12, so just under 10 minutes, and then we'll come back with our next speaker then. So I invite you all to stay on the line. Please mute and video yourselves for our panelists. And thank you to all of our speakers so far. It's been great, and to all of the great questions. I really look forward to the next part of our session. So thank you again, Catriona, and I will see you all in about 9 minutes. We are at 20 to 12. Thanks, Pauline. Thank you so much for this morning's speakers and for some really fascinating talks that we've had so far. I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but I think we've had some really interesting points made, and I think it's been a really important conversation to have as part of the discourse around climate adaptation and climate action. So we're now moving on to a slightly different take and bringing us back to some of the conversations that we had yesterday around coastal management and actually living and working and researching these shifting shores, and we're looking at examples from the Netherlands and some of the work that's happening outside the UK and Ireland, and we did some of that yesterday, so we're kind of going back to some of those themes. And we have Kathelijne Wijnberg from the University of Twente in the Netherlands, who will be talking to us about the ReAShore project, so resilient sandy shores, and the work that the team have been doing on the ReAShore project around resilience and coastal management. So Kathelijne, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Yeah, so indeed it's quite a bit of different talk than this morning, and actually I think it's more about the coastal management strategy that we have in the Netherlands to adapt to sea level rise, so not climate change in general, but more related to sea level rise. And actually it's the implementation where it becomes local, and maybe the interaction with local communities comes into place. So I will be talking about the ReAShore project a little, but I also sort of thought it would be good to give more of the context of the Dutch coastal management strategy, because that really led to things like you see on the screen right now, these really big, huge interventions for, I think I call it anthropogenic shore. And this ReAShore project is something we, I'm not shifting my screen. Yeah, there it is. It's not a project just by our university, it's something we did together with University of Wageningen and the University of Applied Sciences in Zeeland. And there's also a number of parties, public parties and private parties involved in the project, from coastal engineering consultants to water authorities and landscape architects. And the project is funded by NWO, which is the Dutch National Science Foundation. So they make this all happening. So just to give you a brief outline of what I will be talking about. Yeah, so first put some context to why we ended up having this ReAShore project. And that has a lot to do with our sandy strategy for coastal management, which has led to basically these anthropogenic beach dune systems, and then questions that were raised by having them that we tried to address in the ReAShore project. And since that started last year, so in the middle of the pandemic and being in lockdowns and so on, I mainly will talk about goals and outlines and give you a bit of a taste of what we have been starting to do so far. So an important part of the Dutch context compared to, I think, the things that we have been looking at in the other presentations were the coast, sort of this topographic map, sort of the coast around, so like Ireland and in Wales is relatively narrow coastal zones that are affected by then climate change and mass failure or flooding. But if we look at the Netherlands, so this is the blue areas, it's all the darker blue is below sea level, and actually like 60% of the Netherlands is prone to flooding, also from rivers, but also from the sea if coastal protection would fail. So rather than local communities adapting, it's basically the whole of the Netherlands. So flood safety is really a national issue. So I think a lot of, as you will see, is there's a national strategy for how to deal with this already for a long time. So it's separate from climate change issues that sort of come to the front right now. So it is adapting to sea level rise already. And just give you a bit more. So the protection against coastal flooding in the Netherlands from the sea is actually mainly given by dunes. So about 70% of the North Sea coastline consists of dunes that act as our flood defense. And I put two example images here. One, this is a natural dune in the left image, but it may look like a sand dike because it has been managed for ages that any bare spot has been replanted. So it's really a stabilized dune and shown quite little dynamics, but on purpose, because it's protecting the area behind it against flooding, which a large part is actually then located below mean sea level already, like a couple of meters. So even without a storm surge, it would flood if the dunes weren't there. So you don't need a major flood, sea level rise for that. And on other cases where the dunes are much wider, actually the coastal villages that were there already sort of from the past have evolved into coastal towns where recreation and tourism is a main part of the local economy. So actually it's even hard to see there are dunes because they are fully built. And these are actually the areas where we do need to have interventions if there's sea level rise, and we need to be sure that the protection against flooding will work. It's on these cases. So it's kind of complicated how we should maintain dunes in this area to keep protecting us from flooding. So already about 30 years ago now, a new coastal policy was adopted in the Netherlands where it was decided that the maintenance of our coast would be preferably done with sand. So that strategy has been sort of revisited every 15 years. So we're still following that. Oh, sorry. And I have sort of this cartoon outlines the main principles in that coastal strategy. So the lead principle is safety first. So prevention for the Dutch coastal strategy, prevent flooding is top over all others. So that also meant since the floods in 1953, there has been no flooding event in the Netherlands. So I think a lot of the people are not so much aware anymore of the risk of flooding, I think. But that aside, so another part in that principle is that was decided that actually, because much of a coastline is actually all of it is sedimentary, so it consists of sand or peat, is to actually maintain that coastal system with soft solution where possible, so using sand, vegetation, or the nature-based solutions, and only hard solutions like dikes where it's really needed. The third element was in this sort of evolving over time, so in 2005 as well, was this maintenance of the coast with sand, to actually in seeing sea level rise, so irrespective of accelerated rates of sea level rise that we might be seeing in the future, is that the way to sustainably maintain our coastlines is if we make sure there's enough sediment in the coastal system, the natural processes will maintain that coast, because sandy beaches and dunes are just natural states of a natural system. So it will be there unless there's a shortage of sand, then the erosion takes over, and well, the state of the system might change in that there is no dunes anymore, and then we have, of course, all the flooding. So this idea that as long as there's enough sediment in the system, the current state of the coastal system can be maintained, has been translated to, let's say, every centimeter of sea level rise should be sort of supplemented by the coastal zone that we defined at that area times like the centimeter gives us so many million cubic meters. So it ends up that like about 12 million cubic meters per year now are basically nourished somewhere in the coastal zone to make sure there's sufficient sand for the natural processes to maintain the coastline as it is in its current state. Well, that strategy is like, okay, we decide we want to maintain it, but where do we leave all that sediment? So when do we put it? Where do we put it? How often? And so on. And it was decided we have to do this by learning, by doing, because we haven't done it before. We can't do, we just learn from practice. And then in the most recent sort of update, it was also, or actually the last decade, so if we put all that sediment in the coastal zone, often quite near the shore, can't we do things that are more added value than just the coastal safety? So just as some diagrams, so what this implementation of that sandy strategy, in the beginning, it was, oops, sorry for that, guys. Where's the top figure to the right? So we see at first, the nourishments were mostly put out on the beach. But then when this concept that we needed to keep up with sea level rise, put enough sediment in, it was actually quite cheaper to put it offshore than put it on the beach. So for the same amount of money, if you put the sediment offshore, it was way cheaper, and it has been researched, and that actually if you put it shallow enough, actually that sand will benefit the coast and it will get to the dunes. And then sort of the next level was actually one that was, well, if you put all that sediment in, can we also put it maybe in a shape that's also beneficial maybe for recreation or other socio-economic activities in the coastal zone? So that led to mega nourishments. Now I'll show some example of it. That we now sort of, because we create a new beach, actually we refer to it as an anthropogenic shore. And another trend, so the scaling up has been a trend in the learning by doing, but also a change that was sort of initially nourishments were more like a repair after storm erosion occurred, but that has developed now for us to a proactive approach where we said, well, we know sea level is rising. So if we need to build these sand buffers in advance. So that also is a change in a way of looking at, say, adapting to sea level rise. So these are two examples where this mega nourishment idea of huge nourishments has been implemented. So the top figure is referred to as the sand motor because it's a motor driving sediment to the coast. So it's not actually mentioned, but it was the name that was given in Dutch. And well, if you have been in coastal engineering conferences, I think you couldn't have escaped the project because it has been there a lot. And it's actually really why this bulge of sediment is what was put out there. And it should feed the coast alongshore with sediment over the next 2-3 decades. And then that the wind could pick it up to build the dunes in terms of the flood protection perspective. But it would also create possibilities more for recreation, possibly nature development. Another case, so that was implemented 2011, and another one a couple of years later is called the Hondsbosse Dunes. And actually, sort of, that was more motivated by there's the sea dike, this the green line here, was no longer up to standards, and also the beaches north and south of it actually have been receding, and the beach in front of the dike was obviously almost gone. They decided that actually in this line of sandy strategy and having sand in the system, they decided to actually not upgrade the dike itself, but build a beach dune system in front of it. So that's now currently this construction of sand is what gives us the flood protection formally now. So it's no longer the dike. I mean, it's still there, but it's the sandy part that has to provide flood safety. And towards its end, there's also more this recreational thing like a small lagoon out there. And these are also the two cases that actually we use as living labs in the ReAShore project. So, as I said, we call these mega nourishments, and whether they are more in the shape of the sand motor or where it's really a flood protection in the form of sand, they are designed to provide services based on what actually the natural counterparts can offer, but they're fully man-made. So because they sort of meant to sort of take advantage of natural processes, we see these nourishment-based solutions as nature-based solutions. And I think a big difference with the traditional ones is that they evolve after initial implementation, and especially like the sand motor, it has to evolve. That's how it was sort of part of the design. So now let's look at the sand motor case a bit. So it had to sort of, we hope it will make the dunes grow in the next 20-30 years. So building this sand buffer and adapting to sea level rise, but also offer opportunities for recreation and nature value. And what we saw happening actually, we zoom in a bit, we see this recreational facility actually much more is happening than I think was anticipated. In the beginning, there's these beach pavilions, there's these beach houses for overnight stays developing, but they are actually in front of the dune and maybe interacting with the wind-driven sand transport that can make these dunes grow. There's also, they're bulldozing platforms to build them on. So actually they bring more sand to the higher level than was originally there. So we're not sure actually whether that will influence this dune growth on over the full project year. So will actually this multifunctional design where recreation is actually part of it, actually will it interfere with this goal of improving flood defense? And another part, if you look more to the south, well, we see there's dune growth in front of it, but also actually there's a driving corridor, because generally we're not driving on the beach in the Netherlands. It's only like coast guards, or indeed some have permits to have the beach pavilions. They can drive on the beach for bringing supplies. So actually what was happening, there was a lot of driving up and down, and in that area, actually we don't see vegetation development, and vegetation development is crucial for forming new dunes. So also here we see that this, say, it's an unplanned activity or not thought about in the design, that actually all this traffic generated on the beach can also influence the process of dune formation. And at this moment, we do not know actually how all these, say, unplanned, maybe also planned activities are interfering with this flood development goal. So that brought us to the ReAShore project, that actually in the studies done so far in the area, there was a lot of focus on the natural processes. So how does the topography change? So the sediment transport, the interaction with vegetation, maybe some research on the governance, how sort of the whole decision process work to actually implement this. But this interaction with people as moving and changing the landscape themselves in response to what the natural development is. Actually, little work has been done. So the ReAShore project is about understanding what we call sort of the academic language coupled social biophysical dynamics, but it's actually how people and landscape interact and respond to each other. And from that knowledge, we aim to develop guidelines how we should actually manage these anthropogenic shores, so to make sure they meet their goals, or maybe when we change our views of what we want to do actually with the management, because of the time scale, we also might develop new views on what we want to do with that landscape. So we hope to develop these guidelines, which is in collaboration with also the public parties, the water authorities that are in the project. And so we hope sort of to prevent that we end up in the end that we said we actually the flood functionality didn't develop because there was too much of that recreation, or maybe we can also find out that it really doesn't matter. So that's what we're looking into. And just as a quick outline of the project, there's 4 sub-projects. One is focusing on the social dynamics. So it's more what people are doing, but also why they're doing these actions and how that relates to the state of the landscape. So when does an intervention happen, or why do people come to the beach at certain locations, or why they do certain activities? There's a project focusing on the vegetation dynamics, so in relation to people being on the beach. And there's a project that relates to understanding the whole intervention as a whole over the whole of lifetime. So it's integrating the sediment transport process with the vegetation dynamics and this knowledge about how people interact with the system. And from that knowledge, there's a 4th project that it's more about how we can use that knowledge to then design interventions if we think they need to be done. Because it's actually quite, if you do an intervention, the result is not static, it's a dynamic response. So it's not easy how to convey that information with people who have to decide about interventions. So as I said, we just started the project a year ago. It's going to run for 5 years. So what I want to give you is a bit of a flavor of things that have started happening. So it's not a full thing yet. So about the social, say, dynamics part in the project, where we have a PhD student, Alam Bakshian-Lemuki. She's also in the meeting. So for specific questions, she will be around to answer. But sort of to give you an outline, so we follow what we call then the living lab approach. So we say we have these two big interventions. So we've done a study how people use that area, but also the motivations for people are important because we need to understand why they do the things in order to sort of look into the future, what that might mean. So we talk with beach users, but also say as a group that we do surveys, and then it's the group of more people managing the interface, so the water authorities, but also the entrepreneurs that say make a living there are interviewed, and sort of there will also be workshops are planned, and the University of Applied Sciences group are also involved in the service, and they use this concept, what they call mindscapes, where they say, well, people connect to a landscape, to a place. So there is an actual place, but people can see it different, understand it different, or feel different about it. But so whether it's meaningful in terms of a nice place to recreate, or people do know actually this is part of the way we're adapting to sea level rise in the Netherlands, and whether that would make them feel differently about these interventions. So that's another line of research, and from these interviews and surveys, we hope to understand why people, do what they do, how that relates to the state of that landscape. And then we want to sort of formalize it into what we call a quantitative model. So we can't have a real person, of course, in it, but the reason we try to do it, that we can have, so there's more what if scenarios and make it more extreme to see whether this interaction between people and the landscape can actually have sort of unexpected outcomes, or maybe people can do whatever they want, but flood functionality will develop anyway. So this is the kind of question. So the vegetation focused project, they started so sort of in terms of looking what they were doing in this living lab approach. They actually have made test sites near the Hondsbosse dunes where they created already some initial dune formation. So 2 sites, one was close to a beach entrance, and actually see how beach users sort of respond to these developing dunes. Because as I said, if they do activities that actually destroy the dunes, they will have an influence on the dune development and enhance flood safety aspects. So they have been putting them out there, and well, people are using them. I can't say yet any results, but just to give you a flavor of what they work on. And it's done led by Wageningen University. And so Sasha is the PhD student who's hoping to learn useful lessons from all of this. And the third project that focused on the morphological development of the whole area, so including all the dunes. As parts surveys that we have been doing are about mapping the groundwater pattern, the depth of the groundwater, because that's the newly accreting parts along the beach have different moisture content if the groundwater level is different, and it influences how good areas can function as a sediment source for the wind to build the dunes. But we also look into, when we do the modeling, that we include these things like these recreational houses that are put out there and may interact with the sediment supply to the dunes. And then lastly, sort of also when we learn all this sort of Wageningen University group, they will be thinking about how all this knowledge can be sort of put together in a way, especially in terms of visualization tools to help make decisions about management intervention. So once the whole, say, anthropogenic shore is in place, how we manage it. So also coming to an end of my talk, sort of flipping back, we have still a lot to think about and to study in these cases, but we hope in the end that, we better understand what the effects are of people in this beach dune system evolution of these created anthropogenic shores. Another thing, another thing we hope to learn by understanding this interaction is whether there's maybe an optimal mix of this more recreational use and flood defense functionality. So, and then this recreational use, so that's, I think, the link to local communities, but also beach visitors that actually come from much farther away than the local community, but connect through, say, the local economy. And also we hope sort of tourist people have to manage these areas, so we can have useful insights to say what may or may not be allowed, or indeed how we maybe more smartly, by, for example, localizing parking lots, can actually steer where people do or do not enter the beach. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you. And well, if there are questions, please feel free to ask or contact later, or maybe.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Yeah.
I think it was a really fascinating talk, and I'm really importantly brought in some of the themes that we talked about yesterday, but also I think some of the conversations we've had today about the importance of understanding how people use those systems and understanding those social values, and bringing all of that into a really integrated way of thinking about what resilience for these dynamic shores and coastlines actually means, and how we think about that in terms of modelling and management and planning decisions. And we had Cormac Walsh talking yesterday about the German perspective, and he talked about how there'd been a focus on perhaps too much of a focus on technical engineering perspectives, and I think it's interesting to see the Dutch perspective, where it's bringing in more interdisciplinary thinking perhaps. And Greg had a question that I'm going to pose to you quickly before we move on to Gwyn, because I know we're quite over time. Heads up to everybody, we will most likely be running till about 1:10, just so you're aware. But a question from Greg was, do you think the Netherlands has benefited from having that kind of more exploration, or I can't remember the exact phrase he used, but a more explorative approach, so a bit more of an experimental approach, I guess, particularly thinking about things like the sand motor. So do you think that that is part of the way you think about things?
I think indeed, sort of by taking this approach, the learning by doing, I think makes it really adaptive, that along the way we can change how we do it, and it should open sort of to get new views along the way in the process. So if we can change our views along the way.
To unmute myself. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank Emma for the invitation to present here today. I'll be talking about our work with primary schools in Wales. So we are a public sector organisation, 100% funded by the Welsh Government, to measure the beaches in Wales so that we can learn about their dynamics and inform flood and coastal erosion decisions. Will and I, shown on the outsides of this photo, are the two full-time staff. And we've been in place since 2019. We started an undergraduate placement scheme, and we've been running government-funded Kickstart placements. This has helped us enormously with the school's work. We've been given an extended 5-year phase until 2026, but we're still on annual funding cycles. Key point to highlight here is we're not educators by training, and probably like some of you, we had zero experience when we started our school's journey. So why does a coastal monitoring centre have primary schools programme? We wanted to find our first principle as an organisation. One easy way to do this is using the Japanese 5Y technique, which you might have heard of. This allows us to drill down to the root of what we're doing and the root of the problem. So at risk of sounding too simplistic to the experts present, we asked why 5 times. Why are we collecting coastal monitoring data? To learn about coastal processes and coastal evolution. Why do we need to do that? Well, to inform the shoreline management plans, defence design, and plan for our future processes. Why are we doing that? To protect the people, properties, and infrastructure from flood and erosion. Why? Well, we've built what are now high-risk locations, properties and infrastructure here. And why is that? Well, we weren't educated about the future risk at the time when we built our properties and infrastructure. So with this in mind, in Wales, it costs nearly 70 million annually for FSERM, flood and coastal erosion risk management. Are we currently firefighting? And how much would it cost us if we'd have understood nature and built property and infrastructure to be future guarded and in the right places? How much economic impact could we mitigate going forward if we informed the next generations? And of course, our kids will be the informed decision makers. Arguably, education is the single most cost-effective use of our time as Coastal Monitoring Centre, because climate change is a long game. As of 2015, any project or organisation funded by the Welsh Government has to prove its contributions to the wellbeing of future generations. So for us, the schools programme will contribute to the 7 goals shown here. And we have to report on our contributions quarterly. Not being educators, we sought advice from others, such as Climate and Social Transformation Research Project in Cardiff University, and we came out with 2 key goals. Firstly, to breach the disconnect between owning the problem and it being someone else's problem. So here's an example of the children visualizing what the climate change impacted future will look like for them. Then we discussed what we can do to mitigate the impacts. And the children were asked to draw that future, visually connecting the impact that they can have. Second, not just teaching them about climate change, but provide them with the tools to manage and make decisions in the future. Some examples include looking at flood risk maps and doing a basic risk score of the coastline. They didn't know it, but they just performed a multi-criteria decision analysis. We were lucky to develop the 12-lesson programme under the new Welsh curriculum 2022 with a teacher at Barry Island Primary School. It's aimed at year 6, which are 10-year-olds. The curriculum is moving away from subjects to areas of learning experience, intending to provide more purpose to their learning. Within each AOLE, or area of learning experience, every lesson should provide the opportunity to improve literacy, numeracy, and digital competency skills. And this structure hopes to encourage every child to achieve the 4 core purposes. Be ambitious, capable learners, be enterprising, creative contributors, be ethical, informed citizens, be healthy, confident individuals. There's quite a lot to cover and think about, so thankfully the teachers took care of this aspect of the programme for us. So COVID's been an extremely tough on teachers. It's a relief for them to receive pre-made, well-designed programme, which also has expert input and covers a very important topic. We work with a graphic designer to make high quality, engaging material, and it's demonstrated to be easy to follow for the teachers. On the right, you can see an example lesson plan for the teachers, which considers the curriculum and aspects of child development, including differentiation, creating different lesson resources for children of different abilities, the MA team, more able and talented, or ALN, which is additional learning needs. And for us, having nice looking slides is not what makes it special. Engaging real world context, experience through immersion, and children owning the responsibility, inspiring passion is what leads to learning. On the left, you can see children measuring the highest local storm surge plus 100 years sea level rise prediction in their local area. Connecting with international schools is part of our aim, like American Samoa. We've shared experiences between classes. Practical lessons, including weather stations, taking measurements. In the bottom right, you can see using spreadsheets for the first time. And virtual reality tours in our different climates with built-in contributions from, or built with contributions from coastal expert universities around the world. We planned a field trip too, but COVID put a block on that. So we came up with the Ask the Expert sessions where the children interviewed experts through large screens. They loved this podcast idea, seeing it as an opportunity to kickstart their YouTube careers.
We've been looking at coastal flood defences this week. Where's the most money being spent in Wales to protect people from floods?
That is a great question, and one that is really difficult to answer, actually. But a good example, I think, is a scheme that was delivered at a low-lying town on the West Wales coast called Borth, just north of Aberystwyth. And there was a mixture of defence structures that were put in place, and some shingle was brought in to help break the wave energy. And that scheme cost about £13 million. You quite often find that coastal defence schemes cost of the order of several £1 million. It's really, really expensive. And really important that we do the right things to make the best of that money.
Here's an example of one of our interactive 360 case studies used in class. These can be found on our website. We've got in the region of 20 case studies. They can also be downloaded into virtual reality headsets. You can click on features and learn about geological processes and the history of some challenges faced around the world. COVID-19 hit us with huge delays as everybody's been impacted. Our first teacher moved on before completing the first trial, so we had to start again in a new class. Our graphic designer retired during the period. Google rescinded the virtual reality software in which all our case studies were originally built. And we had general public sector procurement limitations. There was a lack of external cooperation and resources at times. And then the other challenge was, how do you keep children engaged with climate education without instilling a sense of doom? And finally, I found myself speechless several times with comments that the kids came out with during the lesson. So measuring success, like any project, we identify measures to confirm success. We started with number of children we wanted to hit by a certain date, but we didn't expect the additional measures that came. We had a full page spread in the latest national flood and coastal erosion risk management strategy for Wales, going some way to securing our own jobs. Impressions through social media from the schools, reaching 1,800 parents per visit through Twitter, appearances in newspapers, and the 7-year external school inspection report quoted by year 6, many pupils debate topical subjects articulately, such as climate change. I felt a personal sense of pride reading this, like a job was well done. So here's some snapshots of the children's letters that they wrote in the final lesson. The challenge was to write to the council of one of the 360 case studies, either in Fairborn, Newton, Collaroy in Australia, or Chittagong in Bangladesh. They needed to inform the council about the flood risks in their local area and make suggestions how they could protect their coastline in the future. To quote the teacher, I thought this lesson would be like pulling teeth in the last week before the summer holidays, but they built up such a passion that they just wrote and wrote. You can see they included facts from their previous lessons, which shows how much knowledge they'd absorbed. So here's a few snippets from our website. So please go on and have a look at our website. wcmc.wales education is under the resources section. We anticipate publishing the full material for free in the coming weeks. We're just waiting for the Welsh translation at the minute. What have we got here? Here's some more of the case studies and the future. So we'll start to target the Welsh primary schools now that the materials have been developed and trialed. We've had talks with secondary schools about making it a transition program. We're working with on some animations at the minute with an A-level student. Our international contributors have discussed getting translations to use the material. I saw this quote on the left and thought it was too appropriate not to share. So my question to you is, could you contact your local primary schools and see what collaborations you could do? So yeah, a huge thank you to all our contributors and of course yourselves for taking the time to listen today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask after this or get in touch.
Thank you!
That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful end to have that big thank you. That was great, and great to see so much fantastic work. And like you said, the passion and the enthusiasm from so many students that you've engaged with, how wonderful to see. And I think, again, draws on some of the points that Verity and that Catriona made as well around the role of kind of bringing those voices in, making sure we're listening to younger people and thinking about how we can engage with schools. And I love your call to arms at the end. What can we do? How can we engage with the local schools in our areas through our research, through the actions that we're taking as practitioners, as researchers, as academics? So thank you very much, Gwyn, for a really great talk. We do have a question for you from Greg. Greg always asks great questions in these sessions. Greg is kind of commenting on the fact that schools and these study centres collect a lot of data about our coastlines, both in Wales and in Ireland, and recognising that perhaps the data might not be as accurately collected as it would be if it was a rigorous study, but it's repeatable, it's there. Is there a way that we can establish a process that year on year students can build on and contribute to that database and to our broader understanding in a way that we can use that information in a meaningful way? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, great question, Greg. there's a lot of value from doing something like that. The first thing you have highlighted is we've got a specification for collecting the data, and it's very, very difficult to achieve. It's a very high standard, high accuracy. So getting students to collect data to that specification will probably be too big an ask. So adding that to our existing data sets wouldn't be my first idea, but it doesn't. I think the benefits of working with universities, and I'd be really open to that. So if there's anybody listening that wants to get in touch, I'm really keen to get in to help get the students exposed to the need for the data, how to collect the data, and start collecting a different level of data which could also be of use. And we'd happily host that data as well and make that available. We've recently published a list of dissertation topics that we'd like students to pick up as well. So we're really keen to engage in the education. And I believe that the single biggest user of all the data that we collect is universities, with 50% of the downloads going to universities.
And I suppose one of the points that Greg made in his question was also that perhaps by engaging students in that kind of longitudinal series of data, so that having that time series data can help them see how things change and make them feel part of a bigger process, and so giving them that sense of ownership that we heard about yesterday as well. So thank you very, very much for that. I'm going to move us on just because I know we're tight for time. Gwyn, thank you so much for adapting to the programme, really appreciate it. I'm now going to bring us back to those voices that we were talking about, those youth voices, and we have, unfortunately, Saoirse Exton, who is the Equality Officer for the Irish Secondary Level Student Union, nearly got the acronym wrong, wasn't able to join us live today, but she has done an excellent pre-record for us about her climate activism, and we wanted to make sure we gave space to these youth voices and to the people working and engaging in these spaces right now. So we're going to hear from Saoirse's pre-record. We're also going to hear a video from St Joseph's School in Rush, so our Fingal County Council, and before we then hear from the Pembrokeshire Coastal National Park Youth Rangers group. So a few things still to come in the programme this morning. There are questions being answered in the Q&A box, so please feel free to look in there and to add the questions. As I said, we'll probably go over by about 10 or 15 minutes or so just to allow us to try and have that discussion. So I hope you can stick with us. So I am going to now try and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. I'm going to mute myself for a second just while I get it working. Okay, hang on a second. It's more that I have like multiple screens and I want to make sure I share the right one. So, Pauline, if you can give me a yes when you can see and hear this, that would be great.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Saoirse. I'm 16 years old and I'm from Limerick, Ireland. And I'm in 5th year Gwelchalosh de Limni. In February 2019, I became an activist, but my tangle and journey with activism really began only a year before during the abortion rights campaign here in Ireland. I was shown for the first time the true value of people power and of unity. Apparently, I turned to my mother on that day and I said that watching the count had been my feminist awakening. After that, I was eager to do something, anything, to advocate for any type of change, and climate change really appeared for me as a concept in late 2018. I watched as thousands of people from Australia marched to the streets of their cities and called for climate justice, and I watched as one small girl from Sweden took on the world. I realised that all this voicelessness, all this telling myself that I'd have to wait until I was an adult to actually make change, all of this yearning for the opportunity to vote, for the opportunity to speak out, could now be replaced by real and tangible action. It didn't matter what age I was, youth activism was possible. I was inspired by all those who had come before me, and all those around me, and on March 1st, 2019, I sat in front of government buildings and started protesting. As you can see, this is some of my experience. My proudest achievement is as Equality Officer of the Irish Second Level Students' Union. One of the best things that I did through that was I created the ISSU's first ever accessibility guidelines. And it was really interesting to explore another side of activism, which I'll talk about a little later. I'm also obviously a climate activist with Fridays for Future. I started the Fridays for Future Limerick's kind of local branch, as you can see on the right hand side. That's a picture from one of our strikes. I can't actually remember which one, because we had many of them, but that was not one of our biggest ones. But it's the amazing experience of organizing and leading those strikes really shaped me. I'm also an award-winning climate ambassador with Untashka. I won the Outstanding Achievement Award at the end of my year as climate ambassador due to my climate activism. I'm also in the C40 Global Youth and Mayors Forum, which is an intergenerational forum of youth activists and mayors from the world's megacities, so such as Los Angeles and Freetown, and places like that. This is my first year there, and it's been very, very interesting to have that really intersectional approach. There's a lot of people from around the world. I'm actually one of only 2 people who is in that group. I'm also an Environmental Protection Agency advisory group member, which is a prime example of youth tokenism and greenwashing, and the importance of upholding youth voice when you say that you are in the first place. And that's sort of the same story for the Limerick and Clare Education Training Board. As I said before, I'm from Limerick, and the Education and Training Board is kind of in charge of local and national schools. The National Youth Council of Ireland's Young People's Committee member and former RTE Youth Assembly delegate on climate change. That was a really, really interesting experience to see the kind of corporatization of what they were calling youth involvement. And so because of this, I feel that I have a bit of an expertise in this as a young person, because I'm aware I've experienced so many instances of real, proper change, like the thing on the right. And then I've experienced other times when I've been told that that I've been given a voice, but I've said, I do have a voice. So, and as a young person, my world is constantly changing. I have to deal with the things that teenagers already have to deal with, worrying about their exams, worrying about homework, worrying about their parents, all of that stuff, the very confusing life that already exists, the inherently confusing life that already exists for young people. But it's especially difficult for young people like me who want to not just change the outdated education system, but also really change the world. Because we don't have the opportunities to really have our voices heard. We're told constantly in a school environment that we're just little children, that our opinions don't matter, that we're naive. And I'll go into why I really hate the word naive and naivety in relation to age later on in this talk. And still, after 3 years as an activist, I am faced with this constant barrage of greenwashing and youth washing, as I've come to call it. So what is youth activism? Because people ask me this question a lot. Activism has become a sort of dirty word associated with violence, fame-seeking, and sort of disruption, like some of the actions that Extinction Rebellion might have taken in the past. But there's so much more to it than that. For many activists, myself included, activism itself is our lifeblood. Youth activism is a coagulation of the inequalities faced by young people purely and simply by their being young people, as well as the variety of equality issues that we have to face every day, such as racial equality issues due to our sexualities, our genders, our religions, anything. Climate action is a form of expression, at least for me and for a lot of other activists around the world, of anger, grief, and feeling sick of general inaction. So, student democracy. Youth empowerment resides in student democracy. At least this is my personal belief. Every student who has passed through a second level education in Ireland and beyond will know the plethora of equality issues the education system brings with it. Ireland's education system is composed on outdated concepts and focuses too heavily on going to university. It prioritises points over extracurricular activities, and many schools overemphasise the importance of uniforms. To kind of put this into context, I have been an activist for almost 3 years, as I mentioned before, but when I go into school, none of that matters. It's all about my grades. And that kind of disregard for the work that I have may have done and many other activists is really infuriating. I can feel myself getting angry about this right now. So it's really annoying to have that every day. I personally believe that schools are generally oppressive. Obviously, I don't think every single school is generally oppressive, but from the schools that I have heard about or experienced personally, that's the kind of general consensus. I believe they are a microcosm of our entire society. What happens in, or rather what is allowed to happen in schools, represents the true sentiment of the wider society as a whole. For example, in my school, uniforms, bathrooms and changing facilities are all gendered, with barely any opportunity to wiggle between the lines. So people who may not conform to one particular binary gender, they have to make that decision because there are no other options. So it is not as inclusive as it often claims to be. Students feel underrepresented and sometimes hated by the school teacher population, and I personally believe that this can diminish the quality of education and general mental health of students, alongside the diversity of issues we already have to face as young people, as previously mentioned. But there is a clear and practiced solution to this, as I mentioned before: student democracy. This concept is quite like workplace democracy, in that it creates a space where students can talk non-judgmentally about their experiences, be critical of the school environment, and actually make tangible changes to school policy. This is facilitated by, as I mentioned before, the Irish Second Level Students' Union in Ireland. I was elected for my first term as a Quality Officer of the ISSU in May 2020, coming into office that June. It was an entirely different experience for me. At first, I felt completely and utterly out of my depth, but then I realised that legislative change is just as important as advocating on the ground. In fact, you need a kind of relationship between those two types of activism. At least I personally believe you need a relationship to make proper change and to really overhaul the system. I began to become more critical of the school environment around me, of authoritarian management and blatant ignorance towards the climate crisis and other equality issues as a whole. This engagement with equality issues on a second level basis really introduced me properly to the concept of climate justice. I was confounded as to how our system and my school itself could be allowed to be so outdated, so I resolved I had to change it, or at least try. This thought process often is not facilitated by schools for students. We are treated as numbers, as grades, and as sheep. It is important that in recognising the importance of young people, we create spaces where we feel able to amend the system around us. The fact of the matter is, if we can't let students change their school, they will retain that knowledge of their voice not being meaningless, and then neglect their part to play in society as an active citizen as they grow older. Student democracy, alongside adequate climate action, will solidify a better society for everyone living in it. It is an essential pillar of intersectional and adequate climate action. But what about actual democracy? In Ireland, the ISSU is heading up lowering the voting age campaign. We want to take the voting age from 18 to 16 for all local and general elections, actually European as well, to ensure that young people are enabled to actively engage and participate in actual democracy. This, of course, would have to be coupled with the education as mentioned above to ensure that young voters are well informed and aware of their options, and this would feed into society as a whole. As young voters grew older, society as a whole would be generally educated when voting, and this would mean that the people that got into power would be people chosen through adequate education and through the adequate knowledge rather than populism. Oftentimes, older people argue against this idea, suggesting that young people are somehow less engaged, more naive, and inexperienced with life as a whole. However, I hope today that I am proving this stereotype wrong. As a reminder, I started activism when I was 13. I am now 16, and I really hope that for those of you that still believe that young people are inherently naive, I am really proving you wrong. I know that I am an exception, but there are so many young people who are so eager to make change, and sometimes it can be really destructive to have that thought process. Maturity, I believe, is not tied with age. Yes, there are many young people who are not, as we would say, mature, but there are also many older people who are not mature either. In essence, we shouldn't be using youth as an excuse to not give young people the opportunity to create change that all of us so desperately need. Youth tokenism, a cautionary tale. This, of course, ties into tokenism. Youth tokenism, as I said before, youth washing, is when a politician or particular group use the image or a soundbite of a young person to promote their own causes. This can be infuriating because it diminishes the struggles that a young person might have gone through to get to the point where they are now. For example, mental health struggles or general actions that have caused conditions like burnout. Or for a lot of activists in places like the Global South, they've had to actively overcome stereotypes relating to their own identities just to get their voice heard, and then they get a photo opportunity with a politician, and that's that. They think that's adequate action. Youth tokenism is the biggest opponent to youth activism. It is terrifyingly easy to slip into being a token for politicians, and incredibly difficult to try and claw your way back to meaningful change. Youth tokenism comes in many forms. It can appear in the form of someone trying to do good, but corporations completely stripping what may have been a good idea at some point in time to an essentially useless attempt at making money and gaining praise. It can appear in the form of a politician posing for a handshaking photo with an activist, but then almost immediately running away before the activist has time to have a meaningful discussion. Actually, I have a bit of an anecdote about this. Our previous environmental minister here in Ireland was on a television show that a couple of activists were invited to sit in on and contribute to at one point. And afterwards we all went to talk up to him, and he physically ran away backwards. And so this is the thing that we have to deal with all the time. We get the photo op, we get the, oh, isn't he great? And then when it actually comes down to it, when you try to have a conversation, when you try to ask and lobby for change, you're literally run away from. It's really, really difficult. Or the worst culprit of them all, when young people are invited to speak at various different events or at high-level governmental meetings and are treated as if their ideas are too radical, too impossible, too naive. I hate that word, as I said before, naivety. I think it encapsulates everything wrong with people who think youth tokenism is an all-right thing to participate in. As I mentioned before, naivety is not tied into age. It is tied to, in my book, experience and knowledge, and to ignore this diminishes the essential work youth activists do every day. And finally, I'm going to be talking about climate anxiety. Climate anxiety is a constant presence in many activists' lives. Every day when we wake up, we are bombarded with articles and social media posts, with constant greenwashing from fossil fuel-reliant corporations and politicians. As a young person, every day is an uphill battle against the threat of totally and utterly giving up in the face of catastrophe after catastrophe, when it really feels like there's no opportunity to even change this. Like right now, the floods happening in Kerala, India are really debilitating, and it's really difficult to see that and not think, how can we possibly overcome this? I dealt with anxiety about the world around me for longer than I can remember. Even before I truly understood just how urgently needed climate action is, I was aware of the environmental impact of everything I did, of how the world was getting hotter. I tried not to hear my parents and my peers commenting on the rates of extinction for so many species across the planet. I pushed the concept of climate change from my head because of how alarming it was, because of the fact that as an 11-year-old child I can do absolutely nothing about it. I'm often asked how I deal with my climate anxiety, and to be honest, I don't. It is impossible sometimes to see the positives associated with the deliberate mistreatment of our planet. How is it a good thing that Indigenous people in Australia still have to fight for the right to protect their own land? What possible positives are there in losing the incredible diversity that exists in our biosphere? Instead, we have to face our anxiety and we have to face the climate crisis. We must stand up to that which threatens us by protesting and working together to overcome climate injustice. We need to call on world leaders to stop their lies and their inaction. We need to create an intersectional, intergenerational movement that uplifts all voices in unison and in harmony to call for a future where all of us can have the right to live. This November, as I'm sure many of you know, the COP26 conference is happening. I'm actually going to be attending in person, so it's going to be a very interesting experience. And this is an opportunity. After 26 years of these conferences barely making an impact, it's an opportunity to finally try and change things. To get fossil fuel polluters out of the funding for COP would be one step, but to get tangible action on the Paris climate agreements and beyond is something that we can achieve no matter how difficult it is. I urge all of you, because I know that all of you are very engaged in environmental and climate issues, to really back these campaigns up, to remind people of the importance of democracy as a whole, of how protests like the climate strikes actually help to uphold democratic systems. Thank you so much for having me here to speak today. I hope I really showed what climate action means to me anyway. Thank you so much.
What a wonderful and impassioned speech from Saoirse, and I'm only sorry she couldn't be here in person. She's at school. But I mean, I have no words. What an amazing young woman. And she, I think, picked up on some of the themes that we've talked about already in the last 2 days. Those ideas of giving everyone a voice that we heard from Izzy yesterday, the importance of creating ownership and of calling for action. I think she really kind of demanded action from us as the adults, as the kind of decision makers, as those that are in those positions of power, those, you know, those in research and in as practitioners, as policymakers, to really call for action at COP26. And also, as I said yesterday and this morning, seeing it as an opportunity for change, as a process. COP26 is not the endpoint. It's something that we need to work from and build from. So thank you so much, Saoirse, for organising and to be part of the session, even though you couldn't be here live. Sol, thank you for facilitating that, and please pass on our thanks to her. She did a fabulous job, and I just wonderful to see those messages of intersectionality and inclusivity coming through as well, and that idea of student democracy, giving people power, empowering young people to really drive change. I am just absolutely in awe. So thank you so much. We do conclude our section on youth voices, and that is the Youth Rangers group from Pembrokeshire Coastal National Park Authority. So I'd like to welcome Tom, Gemma and Charlie, I think should all be able to come on screen. I'd like to welcome you all. While you guys are coming up, thank you so much to everybody who's sticking around for the end of this session. I know we've gone over the 1 o'clock close, but it's been such a valuable, important conversation. So I'm so glad to have you all here. Welcome, Tom, Gemma and Charlie. I can see you all perfectly. I know you're not necessarily going to share slides, so I will mute myself and take my video off, and I will hand over to you guys.
Thanks, Emma. Can you hear me? Hopefully.
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, hi, it's brilliant to be here today. Really, really amazing to hear the contributions from the other young people here. It's a subject close to my heart, and it does give me hope. So yeah, my name's Tom. I'm a Discovery Ranger for the National Park in Pembrokeshire. We've had a Youth Ranger scheme since 2013, and more recently a youth committee, sort of looking more into some of the kind of issue-based work that needs to be done these days, really. So I'm not going to talk for long. We've got two members of the youth committee here with us today, Gemma and Charlie, and I'm just going to quickly show you by sharing my screen that there is a recently created website which sort of summarizes what the young people have been up to. It is still a work in progress, so I'm just going to show this. Hopefully you can see this. So it's broken down into our youth committee and our youth rangers scheme. The film that's going to be shown shortly will be up in on the website fairly soon, so I'll put the link in the chat. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to hand over to Gemma and Charlie.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, my name is Gemma. Like Tom said, I am a member of the Youth Committee and the Youth Rangers for Pembrokeshire Coast National Park. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how the Youth Committee came to be. So a couple of years ago, the Youth Rangers of the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park went and contributed their ideas to forming the Europark Youth Manifesto. And they brought them back. They brought this manifesto back to Pembrokeshire and sort of presented it to Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, and they agreed that it was about time young people were able to get involved and were able to get their voices heard on the the wider stage. And so the Youth Committee from then on, it's quite new, it came about last year. From then on and over lockdown has been working on making a more Pembrokeshire specific youth manifesto. And yeah, we decided to focus on a couple of different areas that weren't perhaps mentioned fully, or we thought were perhaps mentioned fully in the original Europark Youth Manifesto, and two of those being climate change and biodiversity loss. It's obviously a big issue. We appreciate that climate change is here and now, and it's only going to get worse and predicted to accelerate. So we decided to focus on these 2 points pretty heavily, as, you know, what's the point in improving travel if there's nowhere to travel to in the future? So I think personally, the effect climate change is having on the young people of today, like the effect on their mental health more specifically, is because people my age and younger don't feel like they, as before mentioned, can have their voices heard. And I think it is particularly important, but you know, in giving young people a voice in local changes, which is why I just feel so privileged to be a part of the youth committee. And yeah, it's that sort of frustration, like I think her name was, so I can't remember her name, I'm so sorry, but the girl who talked before us was saying that, you know, it's about, you know, we feel like we're not, our views aren't good enough because we're not old enough to give them, but I really think that isn't the case. And yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah, so I'm going to pass over to Charlie now, who's going to talk a little bit about his views on climate change. And then after that, we'll be showing our climate change video that we have made as a committee.
Hi, my name's Charlie. I'm also part of Youth Committee and Youth Rangers. My view on climate change is that our generation, we all have, like we all say, that the last generation and generations before us haven't helped with the problem with the climate change problem. But we don't help. The amount of rubbish that we throw out is remarkable. Yeah, basically, I'll go back to Gemma to carry on.
Thank you. Moving on from that, I think it's important to note that young people, yes, they are frustrated that the generations who have come before us have, in a way, sort of put us on this path to the acceleration of climate change. But it's important to note that they didn't have the science back then to realise what they were doing was having such a massive effect. So I think the young people of today are more focused on trying to get things moving, because now that we have the knowledge and the information at, you know, our fingertips, it's important to then go ahead and sort of make those changes in our local areas for the better. And one point I wanted to put across also is how important it is that local authorities do allow local youth committees to have a voice in change, because it makes the fight a personal one. It allows young people to claim it as their own, and that's sort of what we wanted to get across in our climate change video. So we got involved as a youth committee in the UNICEF Outright campaign. I think that's what it's called, I'm so sorry. Give me a second.
It is, yeah.
It is the Outright campaign.
2020.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and from that we realised that the rights of young children and the effect climate change is having on that isn't such a widely talked about topic, because obviously climate change is such a massive thing. And I feel personally that young people's rights are sort of getting forgotten in the process. As part of children's rights, it's every child has a right to education, to safe homes, to clean water. And in this video, we were trying to sort of get those points across in an accessible way. And yeah, and we worked together on it. And it was a young person produced video, and we hope you like it. Tom is going to get it playing now.
Yeah, I will. So just thanks, Gemma and Charlie. Brilliant to hear that. So yes, as Gemma said, this video has come together. It's been quite a drawn out process, actually. It was a lockdown project that the Youth Committee thought they could do over the various lockdowns late last year. And it kind of started around Climate Week 2020. So it's kind of been a work in progress a bit. There's an English version and a Welsh version. The young people are kind of getting it out there now through various events like this one, but moving through the COP period and through the Climate Change Week in Wales towards the end of November, as well as getting it out through the national park channels. And we're going to be doing some work to get it out to local schools as well, just to raise awareness of climate change in its wider sense, but in particular the effect on children's rights. You will be able to see these videos shortly on the website that I mentioned earlier, and I put the link in the chat. And if you're able to share it, or you'd like to connect with the Youth Committee or the Youth Rangers, then I'm sure they'd be delighted to do so. I know already in the little chat that I've had with Charlie and Gemma online, they're quite taken, I think, by some of the other things they're hearing young people are getting up to, and would really love to connect with them. But obviously it's quite challenging to do that sometimes. So yeah, we'll get on and we will share this video. Hopefully the technology will work. I'm going to take a tip from Emma and I'm going to mute myself when I start the video. So fingers crossed. Okay.
Tom, for us to be able to hear it, you'll have to unmute yourself again, or we won't be able to hear it. I can try to unmute you. Because it's playing the, yeah.
Oh, where's it gone?
It was there a second ago. We did have it. We just couldn't hear it. There you go. Perfect. Oh, we can't hear it.
Tom, when you shared screen, did you click the button that said share sound?
I was just going to come in and ask that.
Sorry.
That's all right. Tom, do you want me to share it? I've got it as well.
Is it not, is the sound not playing?
No, if you try unsharing your screen and share it again, and just make sure you've clicked the share sound button.
Ah, sorry, everybody.
That's all right. Don't worry.
Technology.
2021 conferences. Don't worry about it. So when you click the green share screen button at the bottom, there should be a share sound option. Perfect. There we go.
Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Youth Committee includes 12 like-minded young people from across Pembrokeshire.
We aim to give young people more of a voice on nature in the national park and help tackle some of the big environmental issues we face.
We have created a youth manifesto for Pembrokeshire concerning issues around living, learning and working in rural and protected areas. We've been involved in the UNICEF 2020 Outright campaign about how climate change will affect children and young people's rights.
Kids deserve every opportunity to reach their full potential, but climate change puts all of this at risk, especially for disadvantaged children who are already vulnerable.
A child sees what we cannot see. Their voices are more important than ever before. All children have the right to voice their opinions and concerns. Visit UNICEF to find out more.
I think it is important that no child is affected by greenhouse gases.
Greenhouse gases are a main cause of climate change, and we need to raise awareness.
Okay, hopefully that worked in the end. I feel a bit choked. I feel all proud every time I see that film. Brilliant job by the young people. Thank you very much to Charlie and to Gemma for coming along and contributing to that today. And I'll hand back to Emma.
Thank you so much, Tom and Charlie and Gemma. I can only echo what Tom has said. I think it's been incredibly powerful, as Verity's just put in the chat, to hear the voices of you all and to see and hear from you about what your thoughts are on that video. And I watched it first thing this morning. I felt exactly that. It's quite emotional to hear and see the impact that this is having on you and your passion and your desire to be involved. And I think having that those spaces and the places for your voices to be heard. Jem, I think you said you expressed a call to local authorities to ensure that there are opportunities and that there's facilitation for youth voices to be heard in a meaningful way, that can be empowered and create that local connection and making these things personal. So creating that ownership that we talked about a little bit in the sessions yesterday. Izzy mentioned that in her talk yesterday, that it's about recognizing that while of course individual action isn't the solution to these challenges, recognizing that it is about all of us is really important. And I think that came out really strongly through the points that you've made. So thank you so much for contributing. I know you all came on board quite last minute into this session as well. So I'm so grateful that you were able to be part of the session. Charlie got signed up this morning. So thank you so much, Charlie, for being here today. I really appreciate it. And we managed to get the tech working brilliantly as well. So most of our questions have been answered over the last couple of hours, but there was a question that I just spotted from Greg. It's disappeared, but it was about, oh, where's it gone? Questions, oh, there it is. So it was question really, Gemma and Charlie, for you. So kind of noting and acknowledging your frustration about the lack of involvement, an opportunity, I guess, to be involved at global scales, but locally, for you guys, are you aware of opportunities that you can get engaged with things like the Newgale Adaptation Project that's been promoted by the council? Have you been involved in it? And if not, I guess he was just sort of drawing your attention to it as an opportunity to be involved and a desire to kind of capture views in that process. So really kind of signposting you towards that opportunity, perhaps. Oh, Charlie, it disappeared because you had responded to it. I didn't realise. Thank you. So it'd be good perhaps for you, and maybe put you in touch with Greg and he can maybe point you in the direction of that if needs be.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I don't personally know about it. So yeah, if he could get into contact with Tom, and that's something we'd definitely like to get involved in, I believe. That's great. Thank you.
That would be fantastic. But something I should point out is because of the nature of young people, really, you know, they're in the youth committee, we've got 14 to 25-year-olds, so they're all kind of at different stages of life, and obviously things move pretty quickly when you're a young person. You start a new course, start a job, go on holiday, go traveling, start a relationship, have some issues, you know, all of these things get in the way. And so we have actually quite a high turnover of young people involved. And in fact, we did some work with CCAT last year, which was brilliant. We did Alex's card game, which was fantastic, but both Charlie and Gemma have joined more recently than that, so they're not really that clued up on CCAT and some of the things that are going on. So something that would be useful would be a kind of a focal point for communication maybe around these kind of things, because it's all kind of, there's loads out there, but it's all nebulous and disparate and hard for young people to find as well. And it's you know, communicating these issues is one of the biggest challenges we face, I think.
Absolutely, and recognising that you said, as you said, and I think Saoirse made the point as well, that there's a lot going on in life for all of us generally, but young people are going through all the stuff that we've all gone through, and it's a particularly complicated and tricky time with school and also university and different things and jobs and all sorts of things. And so if there are ways that we can work to signpost and bring opportunities together, make that more clear, then that would be great. Greg, you have raised your hand. If I allow you to speak, would you like to speak? Is that what you're wanting to do? I'm going to see if I can make it so I can make you speak. Hang on, just need to allow you to talk. There you go. You can say something if you'd like to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Greg.
It was just that in your great film, you actually mentioned Newgale twice, and therefore you are aware, but how do you get involved? You know, how are we missing out on actually engaging you? Sorry, there's a massive rainstorm in the background. I'll lower my hand now.
Do either of you guys want to comment on that at all? About how best can young people be reached by, for want of a better word, old people?
It would be great to hear your thoughts on that, because that was one of the questions that kind of was asked earlier in the day. And what I might do is, while you're responding, ask any of our speakers who are still here to switch their cameras back on, because I think we'll need to finish by 1:30. But just to give me an opportunity to say goodbye. But yes, Gemma, Charlie, do you have any thoughts on how we engage young people? That's definitely been the focus of a lot of the conversation today.
One thing I think that it could be a good idea to engage young people is going to where young people are, so obviously schools. I know it sounds obvious to say, but from my own experience in secondary school, we didn't really have many speakers come in to talk to us about, you know, schemes going on. And it feels very much like if you want to get involved, you really have to research and get into like the nitty-gritty, but some young people might not have almost the resources to do this. So it's about going to where the young people are and then really listening to what they have to say and then trying to get them involved, and yeah, like that.
There is, Charlie, do you want to say anything? No. Okay. So, you know, there are existing structures and mechanisms right across Wales, and I would assume the same on the other side of the little pond as well. You know, there's in each county, I believe, or certainly each kind of local authority area, there's a youth assembly. They'll have contacts with youth groups across the public and voluntary sector. So going through those to find out who to go and talk to, as well as schools. Schools are a hard nut to crack. They've got very hard job, schools, but in my experience, it's very variable the extent to which, you know, for example, school councils are a kind of open thing. Sometimes schools just use them as a chance to kind of drive through what they want to do anyway. You know, it's a bit of a cynical thing, but and very often focus on easy questions to answer, like, can we have more toilet paper in the toilets, please? So yeah, try on all the different angles. When you actually are communicating with young people, make sure you're not just telling them stuff. You actually need to be engaging with them, asking their views, their thoughts, their ideas, and work with them to try and make them happen. And it is a challenge, it is resource heavy, and it does take quite a bit of effort, but I think you'll agree when we can kind of come up with some of the outcomes like you've seen from Gemma and Charlie and the other young people on today's conference, it's worth that effort, and we owe it to them, quite frankly.
Absolutely. Verity, I was just going to come to you. I can see you were ready to go. Absolutely.
Yeah, I did answer a really similar question in the Q&A, but I think for those who perhaps haven't read it, we've just gone through a process of working with young people at the Global Goals Centre. And for that, we actually talked to a group of young people before we even did the kind of reach out to find out, what are the expectations? If you're involved in this kind of group, what are your expectations? And it was, we want clear expectations of what you expect of us and what we can expect of you. Payment is really important, so that there is some kind of payment for time. Food, incredibly important. Please have food at meetings and refreshments. If you're going to have meetings, more than one meeting, then please don't repeat what you've said in the first meeting again and again and again, because you're just bringing in different people in the project who perhaps weren't involved in it. Don't have that ratio of lots of adults to only a few young people, because it's really intimidating. And I think time and time again, it's making it meaningful, not tokenistic, not, oh, right, well, we've listened to the young people, so tick, we've done that box. It's actually facilitating change as a result of that, and empowering young people not only to get involved in perhaps other things that are going on, but also developing skills in perhaps public speaking. Not that any of our young people today need development in that. And if possible, I think trying to broaden the diversity of the young people's voices that we're hearing, which is really, really important, because it is that there's some minority groups that just aren't being heard because of various issues that are in the way and challenging that.
Thank you for that, Verity. And I think that really speaks to some of the points that Saoirse made around inclusivity and intersectionality that she brought up when she in her recording. So thank you very much for those reflections and some great advice. Food is always important. Dean, do you have anything to reflect on that? Because I know you've engaged with a lot of school groups and young people as well in the work you do.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention there's a youth organisation in Ireland called Eco-UNESCO that do a huge amount of fantastic work with young people. They also run a competition, an All-Ireland competition, which actually recognises the fantastic work that's going on in Ireland, with an award ceremony, massive award ceremony. So that's good. It's good to recognise excellence and to reward excellence. I mentioned at the start that Dunleary Rafton County Council ran an eco-conference, and that eco-conference brought in experts, a bit like today, to share their knowledge with young people, but also give the young people to express themselves and to ask some of those difficult questions. And I think that's important, to give young people that opportunity to be able to ask those questions and be reassured, that we can actually make a difference. And I think that's really important, giving young people that the knowledge that if we do work together, that we can make big changes.
Again, coming back to that idea of it's all of us, and it is something for all of us to be thinking about and engaging with as we move forward. Finally, Kathleen, I wanted to come to you to see if you had any thoughts through the projects you've been involved in, because I know that ReAShore is thinking about that kind of social aspect and those community kind of dimensions of resilient shores. Is there anything that's been done through your work that's bringing in those youth voices, or anything that you know of in the Netherlands that we could learn from around these issues?
Yeah, so it's not a topic I have been involved in, so I've been listening. It's quite some interest. So I think there is the interviews on the beach, but I'm not sure whether they actually also look towards younger people. It's Ellen. I don't know whether she's still around. I can ask her. I think so. I'm not particularly aware of Dutch initiatives, but I actually was quite shocked about the story where like half of the young people that would be so worried, because I'm worried by that they. I think the crisis expert, I would say, I think fear for me wouldn't be good advice, or as we say is saying in Dutch. So I think the part, it's like the world ending kind of doom. I think that's not what's happening at all. I mean, we have to adapt, but I think there are many ways I think we can. So I think sort of terms education-wise, it's more like I teach like young coastal engineers. So it's more, I think, changing the philosophy of how we can protect coastlines, where I see, say, a role for myself in terms of where I am, that to, and also actually not tell them how to do it, but actually say we have a different philosophy, but it needs to be developed in how we actually do it. So I hope sort of inspire them doing it. So that's more the level I see. It's not sort of the younger kids. I'll talk on high schools or even secondary schools more, or primary schools, just to go to more technical education, actually, because we have a lack of people coming into the technical sciences. So that's, but not specifically to the climate change questions, actually.
That's okay. Thank you so much for reflecting on the point. I think it's important to get those different perspectives, and it's great to hear what you have been doing through the project. So thank you very much for that response. We are very over time, so I am going to close today's session. Thank you so much, firstly, to everybody who's managed to stay along for the rest of the session. For those that had to leave, the recordings will mostly be made available, so that'll be brilliant. Thank you to all of our young speakers, Gemma and Charlie, you were fantastic, and thank you to everybody who was able to adapt to the programme as it needed to change, to allow for the schools to be involved and for people to come and go as they needed to today. I'm really grateful, and that's definitely one of the benefits of this kind of online forum, that we can move in that way. And for me, some of the really great messages that came out is kind of covering a number of themes across all of our speakers. So the need to recognise and validate emotional responses to eco-distress and to climate change and what's actually happening in our world, that it is a valid response, but it is possibly a mechanism for positive change. And I think that was a really important message from the talks from Verity and from Catriona, but also through some of the messages that have come out through our youth activists that we've heard from throughout today as well. The importance of climate change education and awareness raising, engagement, the work that we do to use diverse methods and tools. And Kathleen, you kind of drew on that a little bit in your response, that it's about thinking about this from different perspectives and thinking about how we can all play a role in supporting that. I think we've also heard a little bit more about the coast being an asset and valuing and supporting these coastal communities. And crucially, I think we've really heard so much passion and enthusiasm that I think has really inspired me over the last couple of hours. So I'm really excited to hear what we hear from our speakers tomorrow. And finally, I really wanted to put out a call to all of us working in this space that we really avoid any kind of tokenism in the work that we're doing. I think that was a real clear message that came out from our youth speakers today. And I think we need to make sure that those of us working in science and research and practice and policy making, we need to learn from these messages that we're hearing from our youth speakers and make sure we're listening. So that is a really key message from me as we close today's session. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from some more of the projects. You'll hear a little bit more about the CCAT work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, from the Eco-Structure and Eco-Museums project as well, and a number of other speakers. So I really hope a lot of you can join us at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Hopefully we won't be, in fact, I have another meeting starting at 1, so we need to finish on time tomorrow. But it's been fabulous to have so many of you here. Thank you again to all of our speakers, and I really look forward to seeing you for the last day of CCAT 2021 tomorrow morning. Thank you again. See you then.